The headset cups your ears like careful hands, a soft clamp against the night so the island can talk to you without raising its voice. You roll the felt pads a little, left, right, until the leather stops squeaking and the world becomes two neat circles of listening. Breath steady. Shoulders easy. Frequency down where a whisper lives. You turn the tuning knob with the same respect you'd give a dozing child's shoulder, not to wake, only to nudge. The pointer drifts, pauses, finds the thin silver thread where signal lifts out of surf. There, hold it, don't chase the last half-ghost of static. Let the set warm like tea. The tent, if you can call 4 lash poles and a tarpaulin a tent, leans into a wind that smells of salt and battery acid. The radio's filaments glow the soft orange of embers, remembering they were fire at sunset. You thumb the switch once to remind yourself where off is, the way a person checks the door latch before sleep. On the plank table, your message pad, a stub of pencil chewed until it looks like a veteran, and a tiny paper square with your call sign written in block letters that refuse to panic. The night has opinions, geckos comment from the ridge beam, palm fronds gossip with the moon, and your set answers with a patient hum that says it will be civilized if you are. You speak first in the smallest breath of English. Checking net. Then, as the baseline confirms, all stations present and accounted for, you change languages the way a swimmer dives beneath chop into clear water. Navajo in your mouth feels like home and work at once, syllables that push from the back of the throat into the nose with the quiet authority of a family elder. You send 2 words to wake your partner across the line, a standard call that on paper would look like a puzzle but in your skull is simply a greeting. He replies with a tone you'd recognize at a sheep camp or in a schoolyard. Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm fine. Yes, I'm listening. The night approves and relaxes. You have rehearsed this shift until the clock itself started rolling its eyes, yet the first minute still feels ceremonial. A hand to the antenna wire to make sure it's not sulking, a glance at the voltmeter to see whether the battery thinks highly of itself tonight, a respectful pat to the chassis because superstition loves metal. Light joke 1. You promise the set a promotion if it behaves. It responds by not blowing a fuse, which, by military standards, is indeed leadership material. You check the message can for pre-written strips, fire missions, grid lines, corrections, and then you tuck it back because tonight the plan is to keep traffic light and voices lighter. Out beyond the tent, the island draws its breath in long lines. Waves wrap around the headland in threes like punctual visitors. Somewhere in the black a sentry clears his throat and resets his rifle on his shoulder, a sound that always makes you sit taller as if posture were contagious. Star-thick sky, the kind elders say pulls stories closer. In the distance a generator coughs and remembers its manners. Beneath all that, the radio net hums like a beehive you can't see, units checking time, pathfinders trading crumbs of weather, an artillery battery talking to its own silence while it waits for numbers worth waking metaphor. Mainstream fact slides onto your mental notepad as steady as a second hand. The first group of 29 Navajo recruits reported to Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego in 1942 and created the initial code vocabulary. Hundreds of agreed Navajo terms mapped to military words and a phonetic alphabet, tested in the field and expanded by later code talkers to thousands of terms. You carry that in your head the way others carry a catechism. Destroyer as Luhashka, shark, battleship as Lhotse, whale, observation plane as Nishai, owl, and when letters matter, a phonetic weave, Wolachi Frey, and Bilasana Frey, apple, if the other ant is busy being a letter already used. Your memory is the only codebook, because the paper one is forbidden and, truth be told, unnecessary now. The words live in your mouth, not your pocket. First traffic arrives like a polite knock, nothing dramatic, a grid square to confirm, a say again, for a weather line that got chewed by static on its way over the water. You answer in Navajo, unhurried, precise, vowels rounded like stones worn smooth in a wash. Numbers keep their own rhythm inside the language, 4 beats for a pair of digits, 2 syllables for a direction, silence measured and meaningful like a blink. Your hand writes while your voice speaks. A small miracle of the job is that the pencil and the tongue have learned not to collide. Light joke 2. You once tried to write with your left hand to give the right a break. The left filed a protest and demanded more training time, which headquarters did not approve. The radio set's weight is its own comfort. You learn to carry it like a friend, one hand under the chassis like a cradle, the other on the straps because the ocean has a habit of inventing gusts exactly when you're turning. This model loves humidity the way cats love swimming, that is to say, not at all, so you keep a strip of oiled cloth over the vents when squalls bully the tent. Quirky tidbit your corporal swears by: a tiny twist of chewed gum under a loose tube can stop a rattle long enough to finish a message. You don't list that in official maintenance notes, but the set hasn't snitched yet. The net settles into its nighttime stride. Intervals lengthen, voices shorten. Messages become the radio equivalent of nods at the end of a long table. You sip canteen water and find it tastes faintly of the sun at noon. The pencil stump leaves little gray commas where your glove touched the paper. Later, the morning clerk will call them poetry, and you'll pretend not to be pleased. Your partner off to the east sends a test, 5 characters through the phonetic alphabet so fast that English would have tripped, but in Navajo, the words line up like well-trained horses, be, dikin, tkin, and you catch yourself smiling because language is not a code in your head, it's breath. Historians still argue whether the code's decisive advantage was its inherent security. The fact that no enemy linguist could break it on the fly, or its speed, the way 2 native speakers could send a complex fire mission in seconds while cipher machines and paper pads would have taken long minutes under fire. For you, the debate lands in your wrist bones. Speed is safety because speed feeds guns with accuracy before maps change color. But security is safety too, because a message that can't be cracked is a message that can be honest. Either way, the island prefers that you keep talking exactly as you just did, calmly, quickly, correctly. A mosquito makes a professional inquiry against your neck. You decline with the back of your hand and an apology to the night, which you try not to bruise. You listen a while with your eyes closed. Sound often paints clearer pictures when the tense darkness has already done the work. There, your western station is a hair off frequency. You nudge your dial and catch him again as if you plucked his voice from between 2 waves. You jot a note to tune him gently at the next check. You're not his sergeant. You are, however, his neighbor in the spectrum, and neighbors lend sugar even when it's measured in kilohertz. An officer steps in, ducking the ridgepole, and leaves without speaking because he recognizes the look of someone balancing language, pencil, and voltage. He does the right thing and puts a canteen lid over the candles so the flame whispers instead of boasts. You hear boots scuff, then hush. The island allows itself to be small for a moment, just your tent, a thread of sound, and the feeling in your chest that you are sitting precisely where your hands were meant to work. Another message, a correction to a coordinate, 1 digit swapped like a shy dancer stepping back to the proper place. You take it, repeat it, log it. You think of the first time you sent anything under exercise, how your heart kicked the table leg, and how, somewhere between then and now, the work turned into a natural motion, as if walking. Light joke 3. You once promised your grandmother you'd keep your voice low on night shift so you wouldn't wake the moon. She said the moon was hard of hearing and you should enunciate anyway. You end the hour with a final check of the line. Stations sound healthy, like people who ate and will eat again. You make a small mark on your pad at the corner, the one you draw when nothing exploded and everything worked. It looks like a tiny Hogan roof because private symbols keep company while the clock behaves. You take 1 breath in Navajo, an old word for "it is good," and you let the set hum that same sentence back to you in electricity. Outside, the surf approves by not changing. Inside, the tubes dim a fraction and then return. A slow blink you've learned means, "I'm warm and I like it here." You check the power again, you wind your pencil sharp against the sole of your boot, and you lean back exactly 1 inch because that is all the tent will offer. The shift does not ask you to be dramatic. It asks you to be present, to think in the language that holds your family's stories, and to send that thought across the black water as if thought were simply another kind of light. The road to camp begins with red dirt still clinging to your boots and the taste of juniper in your mouth, as if the land wanted to see how much of it you could carry into a place that smells like solvent and starch. You leave before dawn, when sheep look like scattered stones and the Hogan door gathers its last warmth before the sun claims it. Aunties put coffee in hands that keep pretending they aren't shaking. Uncles make practical advice sound like weather. Take care of your feet. Listen more than you talk. Make your mother's good name proud. You tuck all of it inside your shirt where the pocket doesn't show. The bus hisses, the road unwinds, and there you are between the long horizons of Dienbikia and a fence line that keeps time with telegraph poles. The first stop is a depot that calls itself a city of tents. Canvas rows breathe in the heat like sleepy animals. Dust and cadence echo from somewhere you can't see. A corporal hands you a clipboard as if it were a new kind of bread. Your name becomes letters. Your letters become a list. The list becomes a place in a line, and the line becomes a barber's chair where your hair falls in polite handfuls that look like a small desert storm collected at your feet. Light joke 1. You reassure the barber that it will grow back exactly in time for the next inspection. The barber nods with the authority of a man who has seen the future of hair and found it short. Boots come in numbers, not in the language your feet prefer. You learn to persuade leather with water and patience. A drill instructor introduces himself in a voice that seems to have swallowed a trumpet and pronounces the new rules of gravity. Heels together, chin level, eyes that do not fall out of your head when an officer passes. You repeat the words back to him, in English for now, because ceremony demands a shared dictionary. Later you will translate the same order into Navajo inside your skull and feel your shoulders move more naturally when the verbs land where your bones understand them. At chow the line smells of onions, steam, and ambition. You learn 5 ways to carry a tray and 3 ways to pour coffee without becoming a cautionary tale. Names become faces, faces become jokes, jokes become lifelines. 2 counties away from your mother's kitchen you are still someone's son. The sergeant calls you Marine, which fits strangely for half a day and then, surprisingly, fits. Mainstream fact reads itself inside your head like a stamp on thick paper. In 1942, the first group of 29 Navajo recruits reported to Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego and trained at nearby Camp Elliott to create the initial code, an agreed vocabulary and phonetic alphabet in Navajo mapped to military terms. Later, expanded by hundreds of additional code talkers. A civil engineer named Philip Johnston, who grew up among dying, had proposed the idea to the Corps. Field tests proved so fast and so secure that the plan outran its own skepticism. You carry that origin story the way you carry a pocket mirror, not to admire yourself, but to check that your hat's on straight before stepping onto a larger stage. The call signs arrive like new shoes, stiff at first, then gradually yours. You practice answering to a string of letters that will not know your sheet from your cousin's but will know your voice across rain and artillery. There is a pleasure to it, the formal crispness of "this is," followed by the sound of recognition in a partner's reply. You write your sign once on a scrap and then memorize it into your knuckles so you won't be tempted to look, because paper gets lost and hands do not. Camp is a geography of routines. Morning PT sketches its figure 8s around parade ground gravel. Classroom hours draw squares on a chalkboard until the eraser raises a white fog. You learn radios by their moods. Sets that like shade, sets that like scolding, sets that pretend they are deaf until you touch the antenna wire just so. You shoulder a pack that resents being new and tune your pace to the man in front of you, whose shoulders speak a familiar slant, cousins in everything but name. On Sundays, if fortune remembers you, you carry your new shoes to the chapel and your old stories to the space behind it, where laughter has been known to rehearse the week until it finds an easier tune. Language drills happen under a roof that collects heat and patience in equal measure. There is no printed codebook on your desk. There is only a Marine with a chalk stub and a wall that has agreed to become a dictionary for an afternoon. Destroyer is a shark, submarine is an iron fish, fighter plane is a hummingbird with teeth if you feel lively, and when the letters must march one by one you call them ants and apples and bows in a rhythm that belongs to a different childhood and still works under a steel helmet. You do not translate line for line. You think natively and then speak the thought, which is a quieter and faster magic. Quirky tidbit, whispered across a table and never written on an official form. Some recruits keep a pinch of corn pollen in a twist of paper, a memory of ceremony folded next to a new dog tag. It is not superstition, exactly. It is the way a person says, "Don't forget me," to himself when everything around him is practicing new names. Another recruit hums a sheep camp tune under his breath during code speed drills. The beat turns out to be perfect for sending coordinates at a pace that makes lieutenants blink. You are shown a map like a blanket you have never slept under. Pacific at a size that makes your eyes adjust, islands like new beads on an old string. An instructor taps Guadalcanal with a pointer and says words that taste of coral and logistics. You imagine radios in the dark and decide your hands will not shake when they touch the dial, because someone else's map will be changing color based on what your mouth does with vowels at 2 in the morning. The Corps teaches you rifle, bayonet, field strip, and a vocabulary of mud. You learn to love the smell of oil when it means your weapon will behave and to hate it when it means your hands will slip on the radio chassis. You run until your lungs stop arguing and climb netting until your palms develop opinions. The worst blisters of all turn out to be on the lip, where a whistle knocks when the wind shows off. Light joke 2, you tell the wind it should enlist if it wants to give orders. The wind, being older than empires, declines. At night the barracks dim down to a low conversation of blankets and breaths. You lie on your rack and write words on the underside of the bunk above you with your finger. Owl, whale, shark, turtle, making a constellations of creatures that will have to carry artillery and bearings tomorrow. Across the aisle someone whispers a prayer in English and then again in Navajo to make sure both kinds of angels get the message. You answer without speaking because your grandmother taught you that silence has ears. Historians still argue whether starts as a phrase you read years later and fits neatly over a debate you already lived, whether the Corps recruited Navajo primarily for speed and security or also because Dine had a reputation, in the minds of men with clipboards, for endurance, toughness, and an ability to learn fast in hostile places. The argument tastes like someone else's tea, too sweet and not enough salt. You decide it was all of the above and some things you can't footnote. The willingness of young men to step into a job that would give them 2 names at once and ask them to keep both alive. On mail days the world shrinks to an envelope. Postmarks look like small storms stamped on the corner. Handwriting from home looks like the road to the summer sheep camp, the one that takes longer than it should because you keep stopping to talk. You read fast and slow at once. Somewhere between the second and third paragraph your mother's voice walks out of the paper and sits on the foot of your rack and tells you what the wind did to the corn. You fold the letter small and tuck it where call signs don't live. Then the order comes that will put the chalkboard in your hands onto a beach with a name people could not pronounce until newsreels taught them. You shoulder a radio that thinks it weighs as much as your cousin's stubborn ram and discover that the straps sit better when you tell yourself a joke. Light joke 3. You named the set after that ram. It behaves slightly worse and therefore feels more like family. You check tubes, dry cells, the hand key that likes to go missing, the coil of antenna wire that insists on getting introduced to your ankles. Before the bus pulls out you pause beside the fence and look past the parade ground toward a sky big enough to ride. For a second you imagine you can smell rain from home, even though the air here only knows salt. You square your shoulders the way your uncle did the day he taught you to hitch a horse, and you promise the land you left that you will speak it faithfully far away. The bus door folds you in with everyone else, voices new and old braided into a quiet you all recognize as readiness. The engine coughs, the driver swears gently, the sun throws a coin of light through the windshield that lands on your knees like luck, and the road points itself toward water. When sleep comes on that first long ride, it arrives in little squares like the windows of houses you pass. Light, dark, light. You dream in 2 languages and wake with both still intact. Someone offers you a stick of gum and a grin that feels like a handshake. You accept both, fold the wrapper into a tiny canoe because the ocean is getting bigger in the windshield, and whistle a sheep camp tune until the tune learns to march. You don't switch languages so much as you step sideways into the one that already knows where your tongue lives. English has parade ground posture, heels together, consonants crisp. Navajo loosens the shoulders and lets the vowels travel like water under thin ice. No creaks, no cracks, just movement. The moment you slip into it, the radio net becomes a different place. Outsiders might hear a single long river of sound, but inside your skull each bend has a landmark, each eddy a meaning. You picture words the way your grandfather taught you to picture a creek after snow melt. Listen for depth, speak around rocks, keep the surface calm so the current can hurry beneath. A simple English order. Grid AB42, adjust fire. Would need cipher wheels or pads if you wanted to keep it secret. In Navajo, it becomes breath. The grid square turns into a small, exact picture voiced in syllables that never bothered with Roman letters. The letters themselves, if you must use them, become creatures. Ants and apples and bears marching nowhere visible to anyone who didn't grow up hearing thunder translated into advice. The trick isn't translation, the trick is thinking. You don't convert one language into another like coins into bills. You begin the thought in the tongue that will carry it fastest and safest, and then you let your mouth keep up. Mainstream fact hums steady in the background like the set's filament. The original code vocabulary began with roughly 200 terms and expanded past 600 by war's end, plus a phonetic alphabet, Navajo words assigned to letters, allowing any proper name or new piece of gear to be spelled swiftly without giving the game away. No printed codebooks rode into battle. The book lived in heads that could recite it at midnight in rain, with a sergeant clearing his throat behind them. In other words, your head. You carry categories the way a shepherd carries routes. For ships, the animal world volunteers: shark for destroyer, whale for battleship, turtle when armor crawls across a beach. For aircraft, birds and insects take the duty roster: hummingbird for fighter, buzzard for bomber, owl when eyes matter more than claws. When a new machine arrives on the scene with a name nobody in your family ever used, you shape a word that fits it like a good pair of moccasins fits a foot. No blister, no squeak, quiet where quiet is needed. Sometimes the coinage is literal. Sometimes it's a joke that only another code talker will hear. Either way, it travels lighter than any manual. You practice breath more than volume. Navajo likes to be carried in even pressure, a steady wind across sand, silt settling where silt should. Consonants brush rather than bite. Vowels lengthen when you need them to hold a number up where artillery can reach it. Silence becomes punctuation you can feel with your jaw. Where English stops with hard periods, you place soft bends in the river, breathing marks, rests, so the man on the other end knows the next pebble has meaning. And because your mouth knows these turns from long before uniform days, you can go faster without sounding fast, which is the difference between a sprint and a smooth downhill. Light joke one once asked how you encrypt. You said you don't. It's just that your grandmother is faster than their typewriters. The lieutenant laughed as if he'd been told a parable, and you didn't correct him because parables are sometimes just facts in nicer shoes. You discover that accuracy likes pictures. Say, whale, and the battleship's size sits right in the syllable. Say, iron fish, and the submarine's wet, stubborn nature wriggles in. Directions take on weather: east like dawn, west like dusk, north the taller wind, south the softer one, and numbers smooth into a beat your wrist can keep even when the ground is making decisions underneath your boots. If you must spell, you do it in living things. Ant for A this time, apple next time, to keep pattern hunters hungry. The alphabet never quite repeats itself. It strolls a different sheep path every message so no one can put fences where you walk. Quirky tidbit: during early drills, before no paper hardened into law, someone tried to keep a tiny slip of words tucked into a boot, just in case the mind hiccuped mid-message. The boot sweated, the ink ran, and the result looked like a storm cloud tried to learn English. The sergeant held it up between two fingers, the way one might hold an unfortunate sandwich, and the class learned in a single laugh why the code would live only in memory. After that, someone in your platoon began to call the mind the dry library. It stuck. The code also leans on the joy of synonyms. Why say ant for A every time when apples and axes and arrows all volunteer for duty? Why march whale, whale, whale through a paragraph when big fish and sea giant and the one that sings can swap in and leave enemy ears chasing their own tails? In English, repetition is a drumbeat. In Navajo, repetition invites coyotes. You vary on purpose, not to be clever, but to be clear without becoming predictable. Historians still argue whether the code's unbreakability rested mainly on the scarcity of Navajo speakers and Axis intelligence, on the language's complex syntax and tones, or on the operational security that never let written keys wander, and never let the same patterns repeat long enough to grow lazy? You suspect the answer wears all three coats at once. The language is an honest maze to outsiders. The practice forbids breadcrumbs. The speed leaves no time for anyone across the ocean to sharpen a pencil. On your worst nights, when doubt tries to be useful, you tell yourself that even if someone somewhere learned half the creatures in your alphabet, he'd still drown chasing the current under the surface. Light joke 2. A young officer once asked if you could just talk slower for the recorders. You said you could, but the shelves wouldn't. He decided he liked your way better. There is music inside the work you never mention in reports. You hear how the set's hum sits a note under your voice, how your partner's replies line up like call and response in church, how the quiet between syllables grows a small, kind echo in the tent canvas. On rare easy shifts, you and another code talker swap roles and send riddles during checks. Nothing operational, only the playful kind elders used to keep children awake on long winter evenings. Answer comes back. Because Coyote borrowed it. Or, because 4 directions agreed. It keeps the mouth limber and the brain from grabbing the wrong creature for the wrong letter when it matters. The gift of thinking in Navajo is that you can carry 2 shapes of the world at once. The formal grid the Marines love, squares, numbers, degrees, and the older map with rivers and mountains named for what they do rather than what they look like. The code lets both live in one sentence. You say what the gun needs, and you say it in a way your grandfather would approve, and nobody outside the net can peel those 2 truths apart quickly enough to hurt you. Light joke 3. A clerk once told you he admired your bilingualism, and you almost told him your sheep were trilingual, grass, weather, and opinion, but you settled for thank you. He gave you a pencil whose eraser didn't work, which felt like a metaphor you chose not to explore. Mainstream fact taps your shoulder again. The Corps tested the system against standard ciphers and found that messages that took half an hour to encrypt, send, and decrypt by machine could move in under 2 minutes through 2 Navajo operators. An advantage measured not just in speed but in lives not spent waiting under fire for maps to learn new numbers. When the artillery captain says later, "Good shooting," you hear in the compliment not bravado but geometry returning the favor. Your river of sound ran where it should, and metal found the right square. When the shift quiets, you sometimes practice a little near whisper of the alphabet, sweeping through creatures in different orders to keep the mind elastic. Ant, bear, corn, deer, then swap, apple, badger, cedar, dog. You never get to the end. You never try. The goal is not a list. It's a quickness that comes without thought, the way a hand finds a doorknob in the dark. If a new piece of equipment arrives tomorrow with a name that tastes like tin, you already know which animal will volunteer to carry its letter. You close the set for a few seconds to let it breathe, the way you let a horse stand at the top of a long hill. You feel the silence come rushing in, not loud, exactly, but full. Out beyond the tent the ocean keeps its own code, long, long, short, like it's practicing Morse with the horizon. You put your palm on the chassis, warm metal under skin, and you hear your language settling back into the place where it lived before tonight. The mouth, the chest, the ribs. The river is still there, even when the headphones hang on their nail like 2 small moons. You note your time and write the tiny Hogan mark in the corner of your page again, your private signal that the current ran without snag. The pencil leaves a silver on your fingertip you wipe on your trouser leg like a superstition that's earned its keep. Somewhere a corporal yawns and lies to himself that it's the last one. Somewhere your partner hums part of a sheep camp tune and doesn't know he's doing it. You slip the headset back on, tilt the dial 1 breath, and the language flows forward as if it had always planned to arrive exactly here, at exactly this hour, carrying exactly what needed carrying. Your book fits behind your teeth. No pages, no staples, no thumb-smudged index. Only a shelf of creatures and tools and weather, each ready to carry a military word wherever the line of fire needs it. Before the shift you hum them the way you'd hum a winter story to a sleepy cousin, low, steady, not for show. Humming smooths the edges. Destroyer, Lu Hashka, shark. Battleship, Lhotse, whale. Submarine, Bish Lu, iron fish, sliding under vowels like a shadow under sunlit water. Fighter, Tsidiyaji, the little bird with fast fists. Bomber, J.I. the heavy one that carries thunder. The mouth remembers before the pencil does. You trust the mouth. You build shelves in your head the way a patient carpenter builds drawers. One drawer for ships, one for planes, one for artillery pieces that want precise names even at 2 a.m. One for ranks, Colonel S, Silver Oak Leaf, Captain S, 2 bars, and one for places you must spell because the alphabet in English insists on stubborn letters. That last drawer is full of life, ants and apples and arrows when you need A, bears and badgers and beets for B, corn, cedar, coyote for C. You never line them up the same way twice because pattern is a path and paths grow footprints. You rearrange the animals like a chessboard every day so no one you don't love can play along. Mainstream fact: the first code vocabulary, born in 1942 with the original 29 recruits, contained just over 200 agreed Navajo terms. By late that year it grew to more than 400, and by War's End the Living Book ran past 600 coded words plus a flexible phonetic alphabet that let you spell anything new without giving the game away. There were no printed codebooks allowed in combat. One small training list existed under lock and key stateside, but in the field the rule was simple and absolute: carry it in your head or don't carry it at all. You nod to that rule whenever you put the headset on, as if saluting a librarian only you can see. The body learns too. Tongue tip to alveolar ridge for the quick D, back of the throat for a deep L, air pushed against teeth for the soft SHHH that keeps numbers company without scaring them away. You practice while lacing your boots, while waiting for chow, while counting the last 10 push-ups your sergeant insists are free. The rhythm spills into your walking: left foot for a consonant, right foot for a vowel, pause for punctuation. The men bunked nearest you swear you click your tongue in your sleep. You deny it, then catch yourself sorting birds from boats before dawn and laugh because the mind likes tidy shelves even when the tent is a mess. Your partner across the net learned a different way. He sketches tiny memory places in his head: a mesa for ranks, a canyon for aircraft, a riverbank where numbers lie on flat stones, and walks from place to place as the message demands, picking up the right rock when artillery asks for distance, and the right feather when scouts whisper direction. Quirky tidbit: one code talker you knew tied tiny knots in a spare bootlace under his sleeve: 3 knots for ships, 4-4 aircraft, 5-4 artillery, not as a cheat sheet, just as a fidget that kept drawers labeled in the dark. He never looked at it. He only reached the right knot when his mind wanted reassurance, and then remembered it didn't need any. You hum word lists like lullabies because speed hates friction. If the creatures live close to the front of your mouth, they arrive before the battery loses its temper or the sky changes its mind. So you drill quietly: 10 ship words in and out on one breath, 10 aircraft on the next, then a handful of improvised synonyms until the drawer squeaks with satisfaction. Light joke 1: you tell the sergeant you're practicing. Hummingbird voice control. He tells you to practice at 200 yards away from his nap. The alphabet drawer has its own etiquette. Today is Woolachi, and tomorrow it is Bilasana, apple. The next day Altsai, fly, if you feel mischievous. But you never let a pattern run long enough for an eavesdropper to tie a string to it. E is elk or I or earth. T is turkey or tea or tooth. Some pairs you avoid putting together too often, and apple-axe things too neatly. And some you save for urgency because they run off the tongue like water down a familiar arroyo. Your pencil never writes any of this down. It doesn't have to. The muscles remember, and the muscles don't leave fingerprints. Historians still argue whether the code's power came mostly from language structure, tones, glottal stops, complex verb forms, or mostly from discipline: no written keys, constantly shifting synonyms, a phonetic alphabet that refused predictable habits. You suspect the answer sits in the handshake between the two. The language is a maze to outsiders even when generous. The discipline makes the walls change places while the intruder is still looking for a door. Sometimes, when the night is kind, you pity the poor man with a recorder on the wrong shore trying to find a shark in your river of fish. Field practice makes the lullaby practical. A runner drops in with a strip: battery ready, need corrections. And you let the lists lift like birds from their roosts. Owl, hummingbird, buzzard. shark, whale, ironfish. You do not translate, you place. Coordinate digits arrive in pairs. You cradle them with vowels and set them down complete so that the gun crew's map doesn't trip over any corners. You don't feel fast because fast is breathy and this is not. This is smooth, and smooth beats fast in the way a river beats a thrown rock. It gets there. Light joke too, an officer once asked if you could show him the manual. You pointed at your head, he said. No, the other manual. And you said, we were told to keep the other one in here. Tapping your skull again. He stared as if he'd met a safe with a sense of humor, then offered you a cigarette you didn't smoke because the radio already had one habit in the tent, and that was plenty. 80 odd hours. Latrine line, mess tent, 5-minute shade. Someone will start a round robin. One term tossed into the air. The next man has to catch it with a cousin word that could carry the same meaning if asked. Destroyer, shark. Answer. The fast shark. Submarine, ironfish. Answer. The hidden fish. Fighter, hummingbird. Answer. The fierce small bird. Not to be clever, just to keep the drawers sliding easily. The game forbids showing off and rewards steadiness. It is, in other words, a marine game in disguise. You also keep a drawer for emergencies, the inventions. A new Japanese weapon arrives, or a new allied gadget with a name that feels like chewing nails, and you have to create a Navajo handle fast. You look for what it does, not what it looks like. Does it crawl? Does it see? Does it sing? The right image arrives and the whole squad adopts it before the ink dries on any official approval because memory votes with ease. Later a staff officer might frown and ask for a standard term. You say, politely, that the standard term is the one that everybody remembers under shellfire. Light joke 3. You volunteer to chair the committee for words that don't trip. The committee meets behind the radio tent and serves excellent coffee you're not supposed to have. Mainstream fact again, this time wearing numbers. During a 1942 test at Camp Elliott, code talkers were reported to send and receive a 3-line English message in 20 to 40 seconds that took conventional encryption-decryption systems minutes. Later in the Pacific, multi-sentence fire missions routinely moved in under 2 minutes from mouth to gun and back as on target. Numbers aren't lullabies, but they do hum nicely when they say, lives saved. There's a tenderness to this head library nobody told you about. You find yourself patting the shelf of animal words like you would an old horse, grateful for a mouthful of sound that never bucks when you ask it to pull. You respect the alphabet creatures the way you respect children who carry water correctly, steady, upright, unspilled. You even feel affection for the stubborn few that always make you think twice, some tricky K or Q, because their difficulty keeps you honest, and honesty keeps messages crisp. Debate drifts in like a moth. Historians still argue whether the burden of memorization risked errors under stress, wrong creature for a letter, a synonym that a partner didn't prefer, or whether thinking natively reduced error by removing translation lag. You file your answer where you file extra pencils. Practice decides. On nights when you rehearse the drawers the way your grandmother shelled corn, unhurried, exact, the errors don't show up for work. On nights when your mind tries to sprint, Coyote laughs and steals a syllable. So you don't sprint. Sometimes, off-duty, you open the drawer labeled home and let it season the others. Corn pollen finds its way into your adjective for dawn. A sheep camp rhythm becomes the meter for 5-digit groups. A cousin's laugh resurfaces as the breathe between 2 hard numbers so your partner knows you haven't fallen out of your chair. None of this slows you down. If anything, it makes the words warmer to the hand, easier to grip when the tent shakes and the candle gutters and someone outside says, too softly, incoming. Before the shift you go for a short walk and rehearse just one shelf, ships tonight, because rumor has it that a destroyer will need love, and you find yourself smiling because language that once lived only in hogans and hillside chatter is about to steer metal on an ocean far from where it learned to speak. You think of elders who taught you to say coyote with respect and hawk with your eyes up, and you decide the best way to honor them is to be as boringly accurate as weather. Back at the set you hum the first 4 creatures under your breath, more out of habit than need, and the drawers open of their own accord. No book thumps onto the table, no page tears. The code book in your head. Feels less like a vault and more like a basket, woven tight enough that nothing falls through, loose enough that you can reach in without looking. The headset lowers. The river starts. You place shark where a destroyer should be, and it swims exactly on time. Discipline on the air feels less like rules and more like posture. You sit up in your voice. Short clauses, each one its own little boat, launched cleanly into the current, and never lashed together into a barge that will snag on a sandbar of static. You square your sentences the way you square your shoulders on parade, except softer. No shouting, no heroics, just crisp edges and room for the other fellow to breathe. The set rewards this manners class immediately. Where chatter tangles, your messages skate. Where people declaim, you converse. Where nervousness tries to turn a coordinate into a paragraph, you turn it into 4 calm numbers and a pause that means your turn. Every net has a rhythm you can learn with your eyes shut. Check in. Acknowledge. Pass traffic. Clear. You keep the vowels rounded, the consonants uncluttered, and the gaps exact. Half a heartbeat between groups, a whole beat after a sentence, 2 beats when danger asks you to let everyone catch up without losing speed. You don't change pace to announce importance. You keep pace so importance has room to arrive unaccompanied. Your sergeant once said, "Let the round be the drama, not your voice." And you wrote it on the inside of your head where good graffiti lies. You memorize pro words in both tongues, not literal translations but functional ones. In English the net understands. Say again, I say again, wait, over, out. In Navajo, you place a clean, unmistakable equivalent that carries the same traffic signal without sounding like a dictionary got drafted. You never stack. Over and out. Together because that's like waving and slamming the door at the same time. If you need a repeat, you ask for the exact slice you missed. From second pair, after northing, confirm last digit. So the other station doesn't have to send the whole loaf when you only dropped a crumb. Mainstream fact taps the table politely. Marines enforce strict radio discipline across the Pacific, with brevity codes, authentication procedures, scheduled net times, and emissions control, EMCON, that limited transmissions to keep enemy direction finders guessing. Code talkers operated within those rules, adding speed and security without exempting themselves from the choreography of a well-run net. You live inside that choreography like a dancer who has sworn off improvisation until the encore. Time is one of your neatest tools. You call. Time check. On the hour and let the whole ring of stations tap their wristwatches into alignment. Mark, so that a map correction at 37 means 37 for everyone, not 35 for a unit whose seconds are sloppy. Your pauses become agreed upon punctuation. When you finish a coordinate, a quiet half-breath tells the battery you are done with latitude and about to begin the polite business of longitude. When you finish entirely, you do not gild the ending. You land the sentence, you go silent, you let the net respond. Light joke 1. Once, a new lieutenant asked you to sound more confident at the period. So you sent the next message while sipping water. He reported in excellent bearing of the pause. You protect the net from echoes. If 2 stations step on each other, you don't panic or speed up. You hold 1 full beat of silence, discipline in its purest form, so the frequency can remember what it is like to be empty. Then you invite the last caller to try again. If the surf hisses across a syllable, you do not guess, you ask. Guessing is speed with a limp. Accuracy walks on both feet. You tune your mouth to the radio's ear. Close the jaw a finger's width so consonants don't spray. Keep the mic 2 thumb lengths from your lips so breath won't crash like little waves. Aim your voice a tad lower than conversation so the set's tiny transformer doesn't clip the top of your words into confetti. You don't gargle gravel to sound military. You sound like a person explaining a recipe to a friend who is already cooking. The artillery appreciates not being shouted at while it thinks. Authentication happens in small, sober steps, never fast enough to trip. Challenge. Correct reply. Traffic. You don't turn this ritual into theater. You turn it into habit so your mouth can find it at 3 in the morning when your brain would rather be a rock. Quirky tidbit. A bored corporal once knit a tiny bead string that matched the day's challenge reply pattern, something to fidget with in the pocket, and keep the sequence resting under the fingers like a rosary. No one wrote that into any manual, but everyone who tried it sent fewer wrong replies. The best operators make silence do half the work. You learn to distinguish useful silence, the battery riding, the scout listening to his own dark, from the helpless kind, a dead tube, a snapped aerial. Useful silence you honor by not interrupting. Helpless silence you solve. Nudge the tuning, swap the spare tube, toss the antenna wire over a different branch, alter power if Emkin allows. And when Emkin whispers, little as possible, you reduce even your good habits. Fewer acknowledgments, shorter pro words, a promise to yourself not to narrate the obvious. The ocean already does that. Light joke 2 arrives when your partner bets you a ration biscuit. You can't send a full fire correction without a single filler word. You win by letting Navajo's rhythm carry you. No. No. And just creatures and numbers like stones across a stream. He pays up, and you break the biscuit evenly because victory tastes better when shared and because the set seems to work nicer when crumbs are not lodged in the key. You keep a small repertoire for emergencies. All muscle memory, no debate. Break, to clear the line. Silence, to lock the net when confusion tries to multiply. Your clearest plain English urgent word when a medic needs to stand up inside his own exhaustion. You don't toss these around. They are glass tools. When you use one, the net hears the same click shared across islands and weeks. Oh, this is now. Historians still argue whether tight discipline paradoxically slowed some units. The cost of waiting your turn, of never stepping on a superior, especially under fire, or whether standardized brevity and tidiness made everyone faster together than any one hero could be alone. You follow the answer with your pencil stub. A straight line beats zigzags in a crowd. 2 seconds of order saves 20 of chaos. Discipline also lives in copies. You keep the logbook neat because memory lies and pencil doesn't. Time, origin, destination, gist, no adjectives, no little stories. Your notebook looks as dull as a meteorological table, and that is its triumph. Later, a clerk can reconstruct an hour without guessing. Later still, a historian can read your plain figures and hear the war's heartbeat without your embroidery. Your private marks, the tiny Hogan at the corner of a page when everything worked, the dot when you felt the ocean crossing the wire, don't confuse anyone. They only keep you company. The radio's body language matters. Heat drift will slide a set-off frequency like a drowsy boat. You watch the dial and bring it home in millimeters, not yardsticks. At night you keep the gain a notch down because the ionosphere is in an expansive mood and will happily fling your words farther than the map invites. In storms you shorten your groups and add a hair more pause. Lightning chews long sentences like taffy. If you must switch to a secondary frequency, you do it cleanly. No. We're going to. Just the agreed pro word, the exact minute, and then you are gone, and then you are back, and no one's temper tears. Light joke 3. The island's geckos have started to associate your clearest Navajo with chow time, scampering down the tent pole whenever you say a word that sounds like corn. You decline to add them to the alphabet drawer. They decline to care. You teach discipline sideways to the new man without turning it into a sermon. You let him wear the headset for a minute of check-ins, and then take it back before nerves turn over, into, out. You let him read your lips as you speak and see how the mouth shapes quiet. You hand him the logbook so he can feel what a tidy hour weighs. When he asks how to sound steady, you tell him the trick you learned from an elder by a sheep pen: breathe out before you speak. Never try to talk while the body still thinks it is a drum. On some nights the whole net breathes together. You can hear it in the spacing of transmissions, the way nobody crowds anyone's sentence, the way, wait, is honored like a hand raised in a big room. A veteran battery commander once sent a compliment in the plainest English after a long mission: good net, and you wrote the words small in the margin because they meant, we were one voice with many throats. You closed the set at shift's end with the same deliberate grace you opened it. Final time check. Final acknowledgement. A soft, clear, that is more kindness than command. The tubes dim like evening on far sandstone. You wrap the handset cord in a figure 8 so it will forgive you tomorrow. You place the pencil parallel to the page like a bookmark. The island takes back the night. Somewhere a wave tells another wave what it learned today about patience. Outside, your mouth still holds the shape of good pauses. You speak a goodnight to the sentry in English and another to the moon in Navajo because both have done their jobs. Back in the tent you think of your grandmother, who never used a radio but could make a room quiet with one look. You borrowed that trick and made it into a net procedure. You lie down, and before sleep finds you, you hear, under surf, under leaves, the small, exact click of discipline turning 1,000 voices into one message that knew precisely when to stop talking. The field set is a small, stubborn animal that lives in a steel box and responds best to gentle hands. You lift it by the webbing straps the way you'd lift a sleepy child, close to the chest so it doesn't decide gravity is a suggestion, and you set it down with respect for the table that must carry both radio and map and your elbows when the evening grows persuasive. The chassis holds its warmth the way a stone holds late sun. Your palm reads it like braille. Tubes awake, transformer in a good mood, no scent of solder telling you someone got clever without permission. You loosen the handset from its cradle like untangling hair. The cord remembers the last figure 8 you tied and forgives you. The ritual of making a voice live in wire begins with a fingerdip, not a switch. Volume down, gain down, tuning to an agreed not quite where the net will be in one breath. Power on. The filaments blossom dull orange, shy embers at first, then steady coals. You let them find themselves. Rushing a warm-up is like rushing bread. It will rise, but it will sulk. While the radio remembers its shape, you straighten the antenna lead, smooth kinks with the back of your knuckles, and sight the run up the pole or through the tree branch so the wire doesn't argue with leaves. When the set hisses its politest hello, you lift the gain a whisker and hear the island come back. Surf at the far edge of the band, someone's cough 2 clicks off, your partner carrying on with his evening breath like a man who has learned to sleep standing up with his eyes open. Mainstream fact: Marine and Navy units in the Pacific used a grab bag of radios. Backpack FM sets like the SCR-300 introduced in 1943 for short-range infantry nets, pocket. Handy talkies, such as the SCR-536, and heavier AM/HF sets like TBX or TBY for longer reaches. Code talkers worked across whatever the table produced, trading speed in Navajo for the particular quirks of each box's frequency, range, and appetite for batteries. You've met more models than schoolteachers and learned the same truth about both. Respect their tempers and they'll help you graduate. Weight is not just mass, it's design philosophy. The backpack set rides your spine like a very determined uncle. The larger HF box pretends it is a piece of furniture until it asks to be carried like a piano. You learn to walk with knees a fraction softer so the tubes don't clap together in protest. Your buddy takes the spare battery, you take the aerial kit and the handset, and both of you take the joke that whoever trips first buys the other a can of peaches if supply ever remembers peaches exist. Light joke 1, you name the battery, grandmother, because everyone listens when it enters the room. The battery, asked for comment, hums at 12 volts and declines interviews. Every set has a smell. Dust whose parents were rain clouds, hot varnish, canvas that knows salt by its first name. You can diagnose by nose before the voltmeter has finished deciding where the needle will nap. Ozone? Check connectors. Vinegar sour? A cell vented and would like a bath. Burn hair? Find the resistor that thought it was a hero and tell it it's not. You keep a small roll of tools not because you plan to be a wizard but because screws loosen, clamps forget their vows, and screws grow shy in the dark. A jeweler's screwdriver for reluctant trimmers. A pencil eraser for contacts that need civilizing. A length of oiled cloth to keep the mist off the places where mist invents trouble. Quirky tidbit. One operator in your outfit swears by a trick he learned from a crew chief. Dab the faintest smear of graphite from a soft pencil on the dial cord where it rides the pulley. The tuning knob stops feeling like it's arguing with string and starts feeling like a good door hinge. Another slips a sachet of dried rice inside the accessory pouch, per man's desiccant, so the handset doesn't wake up sticky on lagoon mornings. No manual approves, no manual needs to. The set appreciates useful sins. Antennas are mood rings for the sky. Long wire for the old AM box, throw it high, Keep it clear of branches that will sing their own songs in wind. Whip for the backpack FM, straight, proud, tipped away from fronds so it doesn't collect a small garden. If you have to string a low wire between two pegs because the beach is a rumor and the trees want to be elsewhere, you sight along it so it runs true. Sag tells lies about resonance, and lies are for enemy propaganda, not your net. You step back, squint, and listen with your eyes. Sometimes a wire that looks wrong sounds right, and your job is not aesthetic but electrical. You treat the tuning knob like a stethoscope. Don't chase, invite. You rock the dial across the station and return to center like a boat that understands harbors. In the heat the frequency will drift like a nap. You nudge without scolding. At night the ionosphere takes up ballroom dancing and the band changes tempos between sentences. You shorten your groups a hair, add 1 grain of pause, and trust your partner to do the same. When lightning flashes beyond the headland, you taste it on the audio, a crackle like paper being torn in a quiet library, and you ride the noise floor until it behaves. Light joke 2, you tell the storm you've already checked out this book. It suggests late fees. You pay in patience. Hands manage the handset the way you manage a skittish colt. Thumb on the push to talk without strangling it. 2 finger widths from your mouth so breath doesn't become weather. Cable looped once around your wrist so if a shell hits, and the tent forgets being a tent, you don't donate the handset to the ocean. You keep the cord off the table's edge so it doesn't learn gravity's jokes. You never hang the handset on the aerial wire because it will fall in love and then sulk when separated. The power conversation is constant and domestic. Battery towards full at shift start, towards sensible by midway, toward swap me, if the generator spent the afternoon reconsidering its life choices. You log voltages the way a cook logs temperatures. You never run to empty on purpose. Empty teaches nothing and keeps you late. When a spare arrives you change with the grace of a relay. No drama, no sparks, negative first, then positive, reverse with dignity, tighten without shaving the threads. You label the tired one with a scrap of tape and a time because future you should not have to guess which sibling is the sleepy twin. Mainstream aside within your pocket. The SCR 300's FM made it less prone to static than AM sets, but jungle and hills still ate range. The handy-talkie SCR 536 fit a hand but not always a mission, so nets layered equipment, and code talkers stapled speed to whatever box could reach. Your method is agnostic. Find the best wire to throw today, the least argumentative dial, and the clearest path between numbers and guns. Historians still argue whether equipment choice, the shift from AM to FM, the particular brands of Navy sets, the height of aerials, mattered more to reliability than training and operator discipline. Or whether what really saved messages was the unglamorous maintenance that kept boxes dry, tuned, and powered by operators who listened more than they twiddled. You place your bet on the triangle: gear, training, care. Take one away and the other 2 must work miracles. Leave all 3, and even a mediocre day becomes a net that sounds like a room of adults. The set likes to be spoken to, and that includes screws. A loose cover sings a buzz at specific vowels. You find it with your fingernail and snug it until the choir quiets. A tired tube announces itself by causing sentences to lean. You swap it with the spare you wrapped in felt and stored where your lunch should be. The antenna base, if allowed to wobble, will write a diary of your sins and crackle. Tighten it before it becomes literature. If a connector takes offense at humidity, a twist of cloth and a breath of warm air from the battery case persuades it to be social again. Light joke 3. The geckos have now decided the hand mic is a moon they can worship. They line up on the ridgepole when you say, owl, and pretend it's a hymn. You promise them a promotion to official mascots if they learn pro words. They blink in Morse that translates to more moths, fewer rules. When the set is right, the rest of you can be kinder. Your voice doesn't have to lean on words to make them fly. Your hand can write numbers without the pen attacking the paper like a bayonet drill. Your ears have room to hear the difference between a partner clearing his throat and a partner needing you to repeat the last pair. The tent returns to being a tent instead of a tribunal. In that space, speed borrows smoothness and both of them work for survival. Before you kill power at the end of watch, you let the filaments cool with the same patience you gave them when you woke them. Switch off. headset on the nail. Cord in a figure 8. Aerials slackened so the night wind can perform its gentle mischief without breaking your heart. You pull the battery strap snug so it doesn't dream of rolling, and you lay a hand flat on the top cover. A thank you. Machines are not people, your sergeant says, but people are kinder when they thank machines. You step outside into air that has decided to be damp to the elbows. Far off, artillery clears its throat and then decides the hour is too polite for drama. You stretch the kinks from your shoulders, one at a time, like a man returning a borrowed coat. The set's warmth lingers in your hands a few minutes longer, long enough to light your cigarette even though you don't smoke, long enough to make your canteen lid feel friendly, long enough that the next operator who touches the box will think, someone treated you well. That's the real maintenance. Soft hands that remember every knob has a small job and a large pride. You leave the tent rope tied with a sailor's knot that will come undone without spite when the squall arrives, and you walk the 3 steps to the edge of the clearing where the island rehearses the same line it delivered yesterday: surf, leaf, insect, silence, repeat. Your palms cool. Your breath steadies. Somewhere your partner mutters, "Good net," to no one and means you. You don't answer aloud. You pat the aerial pole instead, and the wire, feeling the gesture through 100 tiny strands, hums back a private word for steady. Night comes like someone laying a cool hand on a hot forehead. You feel the island relax one ligament at a time, day birds folding themselves into leaves, work voices turning to low murmurs, even the generator trading its daytime cough for a steady hum that sounds like someone humming to a sleepy dog. You slip your headset half off one ear and let the other ear belong to the beach. The surf practices its 3 count till it gets it right: 1, 2, hush, 1, 2, hush. A breeze visits the tent, tastes the canvas, and leaves a salt kiss on your wrist. The sky above stops being a roof and starts being a well. You look up and it looks back with a bucket full of stars. Light discipline dims everything to the color of patience. No flashlights, only hooded lamps and the moon doing slow work. The set's filaments make the softest ember in the corner, enough to prove electrons believe in you tonight, not enough to tattletale to planes that prefer darkness for company. Out beyond the palms, someone flips a shovel gently, latrine duty conducted like a ceremony. You hear sand fall back with good manners. Farther off, a sentry whistles 2 notes, and then lets them wander away, as if even the melody knows not to raise its voice. The island has its own net, one the radio can't log. Tree frogs start up like a string section tuning. One gecko makes that little chircher that sounds like a cork winking out of a bottle. Hermit crabs conduct a committee down the path, tapping mess tin leftovers with shell knuckles. Over the lagoon, a flying fox redraws the star map with his wings. You fit your breathing to their timing until your ribs tick like a pendulum that forgot how to hurry. Mainstream fact takes its place politely in your ears. Code talkers served across the Pacific campaigns: Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Tarawa, Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, carrying these night nets on backs and in foxholes. On Iwo Jima alone, Navajo operators reputedly sent and received hundreds of messages under fire. Days and nights layered with alerts and lulls. Nights there were less lullaby than drill, but even on noisy islands, the stars still came when they could. You learn to trust both truths at once. The universe is large and steady, and you still have a grid to send at 02:17. You make a small circle of living. Canteen set where your left hand finds it blind. Message pad tilted so the pencil skates without catching. Headset cord looped so it won't flirt with your ankles if you stand fast. The surf takes care of your metronome. The stars take care of your compass. You've been told to keep a weather eye on the southern horizon for aircraft, so you do, and the Milky Way rewards you with a quiet river whose only cargo is memory. Some nights the dark is thick with history. You hear the echo of yesterday's bombardment in your bones the way a drumhead keeps humming after the stick lifts. You feel the way coral holds heat, even after midnight it gives your boots a warm word or two. A cloud slips under the moon and the beach goes soft focus. You taste the tiny change in the set's noise floor before your eyes even register the shadow. The island and the radio talk about the same thing in 2 dialects. You translate without noticing. Light joke 1. You would like to file a complaint with the coconut crabs about their appetite for anything that shines. They answer by moving a spoon 10 feet and then looking innocent. You salute their initiative and hide your spare pencil under your hat. The crabs, being unionized, refuse to comment further. You think, sometimes, of the sound map of home: sheep bells swinging slow, wind sifting juniper, a grandmother's cedar ladder creaking as a cousin climbs for a view, and how different this ocean is, yet how similar your job is to carrying wood, steady trips, no spills, no bragging. The radio hisses comfortably. Your mouth shapes an answer for a check-in that hasn't arrived yet. You scratch a little star in the margin of your log where nobody but you will ever care, just to mark the particular kindness of this hour. Quirky Tidbit grows legs and walks through camp. Someone has strung a length of shell casing on a trip thread outside the tent, so a visitor who doesn't announce himself sets off a gentle clink-clink. Not an alarm, exactly, more a manners bell. Another hand tied a spent .30-06 cartridge to the zipper pull of the tent flap. Not for speed, but so fingers in the dark identify the right metal on the first try. Improvised etiquette, nighttime edition. You nod to both inventions and vow not to kick either when you hunt your canteen at 4. The sea breathes. The palms sway. The horizon does its best impression of forever. Then, just as the brain begins to float, the net taps your shoulder. A Unit 2 Valleys North voice wrapped in frog song asks for a time check. You give it, clocks align like soldiers at inspection. A scout whispers a line of Navajo that means, "Quiet to the east," and you pass the meaning along in a sentence as smooth as tide on flat sand. Over the ridge, artillery clears its throat, one test cough, and is polite enough to wait while you finish your point. Historians still argue whether nighttime radio discipline in the Pacific cost opportunities, messages withheld to avoid direction finding, or saved lives by starving enemy ears of targets, whether the island night was more dangerous because it hid movement, or safer because it hid you. Your answer stays practical. Do what the Emkin board says, move words like candles under cupped hands, and trust your partner's eyes where yours cannot reach. The debate can have the afternoon. The night gets the work. You set your back to a palm and let bark remember your shape. A meteor draws its very efficient line across one corner of the sky. In Navajo you know a handful of words for this, stars behaving like relatives in a hurry, so you pick the gentlest and say it under your breath, as if the net could appreciate poetry without losing bearings. The pencil writes on without asking permission. Your partner sends 5 letters so quickly they sound like a single fish turning. You catch them and smile, because brains taught in the same hills tend to keep pace even when the ocean has opinions. Light joke 2. A junior officer arrives on cat's feet and stage whispers, "What are you hearing?" You answer, perfectly truthfully, "Frogs in B flat, sir." He nods with dignified confusion, pretends that was the briefing he expected, and retreats to go consult a map about amphibian tonal systems. You add nothing to your log except the correct time. The tent, in this hour, feels wider than canvas allows. You and the set and the sea and the small life in the leaf litter are all part of a patient argument with night about who gets to keep the quiet. Most nights, quiet wins and allows a little work to pass. On the others, aircraft remind you that silence is also strategy, and that you will one day wish for nothing more than the sound of surf very soft and very near. Tonight belongs to kindness. You borrow its softness and pay it back in clear diction and measured pauses. A cloud bank stands out over the water, far and tall. Lightning climbs it like someone drawing a ladder with a fountain pen. You count between flash and far, far rumble, not weather for you, weather for other islands practicing their own lullabies. The set receives a polite scratch across the band when the electricity writes its autograph. You tilt the dial and the scratch walks away like a sandpiper. Somewhere in that chocolate cloud, someone else is listening to a different ocean and learning the same lesson. Speak when you must. Let the sky do the rest. Noise decides to be generous. The surf louder for a minute, then less, then right-sized again. You take a drink without looking, your hand now an instrument that knows canteen from handset from pencil by texture alone. The page takes another line of neat figures and a small private curl at the corner where you keep count of uncomplicated minutes. Complication loves day. Night likes order and the small sound of turning a page. Light joke 3. The geckos, who have learned your alphabet only insofar as it occasionally sounds like. Moth. Hold a tiny conference on the ridgepole and vote unanimously to recommend more vowels. You promise to bring this suggestion to the Council of Radios in the morning. They accept this diplomatic victory by catching a mosquito you would have slapped and saving you the trouble. You stand once, quietly, to remind joints they have duties. The horizon holds. The net holds. The stars hold, as they have been holding since long before any of this learned to speak. Your mouth opens and a sentence goes out into the dark, exact and small and fast, and somewhere a pen moves on a map, and somewhere a gun crew adjusts, and somewhere a life remains where it is meant to be for one more hour. The island approves by not changing its mind. When you sit again, the sand gives a sigh and rearranges itself under your heel, the kind of courtesy that would win medals if medals noticed sand. The pencil makes one last neat digit. You press the log flat with your palm, and the corner of your page earns its tiny Hogan mark because the night behaved and you return the favor. You take one breath just for you, corn, cedar, salt, and then give the air back, the way water returns to the sea. The headset warms your ear like a friendly hand. The ocean keeps time. The sky spills light in numbers too high to count. And you, exactly where you should be, listen until listening turns into the whole shape of the world, and talking is just a narrow bridge you lower only when someone must cross. A grid is just a polite way to ask the earth to hold still for a moment. You square the map in your mind, letters across, numbers down, until the patch of coral and scrub where someone is worrying becomes a neat box you can name, and then you put the name in your mouth and send it into the dark. You don't think, coordinate, as much as you think, address, because addresses want to be said clearly, once, and believed. The headset warms one ear, the other ear keeps the surf for company. You roll the pencil half a turn so the sharp edge is ready, straighten the message pad to the old habit angle, and wait for the call that will turn your tongue into a ruler. There, a fire direction center whose voice you've grown to like. Calm, patient, the sound of a man who files paper well, asks for a grid. You answer in Navajo before English has time to clear its throat. Digits arrive as paired steps. You place each pair with breath that neither rushes nor drags. The vowels tank and carry. The consonants sit inside the numbers like pebbles, weight enough to keep them from rolling away. You speak like you're counting sheep for a child. Exact, sleepy, no drama. Only this time the counting will move steel instead of dreams. Because the map is shorthand for places you could walk, you picture the ground while you speak. That notch where coconut trees gave up, the trickle where tide plays schoolteacher with sand grains, the stubborn hillock that insists on being taller than your squad leader would prefer. The grid letters and numbers are the Army's way of naming those manners. Your job is to say them as if they were already true. You chalk your pencil across the pad after each pair, not to remember, you already do, but to give your hand a task while your mouth keeps its river smooth. Mainstream fact keeps time in the background. On Iwo Jima in February 1945, Marine Signals Officer Major Howard Connor later reported that 6 Navajo code talkers working his nets sent and received hundreds of messages in the first 48 hours. All without error. He credited their speed and reliability as crucial to keeping artillery and infantry tied to the same map while the island tried very hard to erase maps. You don't say the line out loud. This is not a movie. But you do hear the artillery answer your grid with an, on it, that feels older than metal. The first round is always a handshake. Shot, the battery says. You answer in habit. Splash, they warn. You nod even though nobody can see, and your body counts quietly to the place in the heart where impact arrives. Up on a ridge, the observer's voice comes back with the small, precise adjectives that matter, over or short, left or right, add or drop. The verbs are simple, the responsibility isn't. You take the correction like a clerk who loves decimals, and your tongue translates it into Navajo where add feels like putting another log on a winter fire and drop feels like easing a bucket down a well. Left, And right, behave as cousins who always sit in the same seats at supper. You send the new numbers, not as commands but as carpentry. Trim here, shave there, true the edge. Light joke 1. The forward observer once told you his binoculars are allergic to adjectives. They break out in confusion if anyone says a bit, or sort of. You promise to feed them only numbers and the kind of directions anyone could paint on a fence. The binoculars have not filed a complaint since. The best minutes are bracket minutes, over, short, and then the sweet small, on. That makes every watch on the net feel like it was wound properly at birth. You don't crow, you don't even smile where anyone can see. You write one tiny mark, a dot, no more, in the pad's margin, the private way you say. The map and the metal agreed to be neighbors. Your partner across the island, who grew up hearing the same sheep camp tune you did, hears your breath lighten and knows you've walked the round home. Numbers behave better when they keep company. You break long strings into pairs the way a careful cook breaks spaghetti in half so it doesn't flail in the pot. If a digit arrives muddy, static slapping its shoes, you ask for that digit alone. The last of the first pair, not the whole street address. Guessing is a sin reserved for people who want statues. You prefer accuracy and sleep. You carry a little ruler in your head not for the map but for your sentences. Each must fit a breath and leave room for the next breath to arrive without bumping. Quirky tidbit. Your pencil is tied to your wrist with a length of parachute cord scavenged from a friendly supply sergeant. Not because pencils are flighty, they are, but because undershelling your fingers have been known to forget who they belong to. The cord remembers for them. On a good night it's only a nuisance when you reach for the handset and find your hand still politely tethered to graphite. Corrections come in different flavors. Some feel like trimming a beard. 2 clicks right, 3 clicks add, the kind of grooming a battery enjoys. Others arrive wearing urgency, the observer's voice like a taut wire. Repeat, fire for effect. The phrases that lift a room's shoulders together. Your job is identical in both cases. Say what is asked, precisely, without dropping an ounce of calm into the line. The effect belongs to someone else's iron. Your voice is the quiet hands that arrange cutlery so dinner can happen. Historians still argue whether bracketing, shooting over and short to zero in, or creeping out to target from one side saved more time and shells in Pacific terrain where foliage lied and coral played tricks. Whether the speed of code talker traffic prevented friendly fire more than it accelerated offensive pace. Or whether both are true enough that arguments should focus on range tables instead. You decide the debate can visit tomorrow. Tonight the map is breathing evenly, the battery is answering with that clean clerkly tone you like, and you have just set a coordinate so neatly even the geckos pause to approve. Every so often a grid is not the whole story. A unit wants a target description attached. Palm front gun pit, splinters visible, flash under the lip. And you oblige without becoming a novelist. In Navajo you can give a very small picture with 2 soft strokes. The forward observer thanks you by not having to draw it with syllables from a ditch. When he says, danger close, in the carefully plain English everyone has agreed upon, you write the words large even though you will not, must not, speak them large. Light joke 2. Once, during a rain that persuaded every map to curl up like a sleeping dog, you improvised a protractor from a ration tin lid and a sliver of stick. The lieutenant, seeing you measure like a picnic, asked if it was to scale. You said, to hunger, sir, and sent the bearing. The round landed as if it had read the label. Some corrections you could do asleep but never will. Repeat last, say again figures, after eastings, confirm northings. You refuse to get bored in the way you refuse to leave a gate unlatched. Boredom breeds the single drop digit that moves shells from argument to tragedy. So you make a habit of exact questions, never sullen, always precise, the way a good teacher asks for the step a student skipped. Your pencil underlines the digit you just saved like a small medal nobody else will pin. The radio's body language changes when a mission goes right. The noise floor seems to settle, even if the sea hasn't altered. Your ear hears fewer fidgets from the dial. The net's cadence tightens into a choreography that pleasure engineers would admire if they built dances. You do not dance. You keep the gain where it belongs. You polish the next string of numbers with your tongue, and you let the battery live in that sweet upper half of charge where voices feel less like work. Mainstream aside, within your pocket, standard American maps in the theater used alphanumeric grid systems. The old blue/red grids shifting to military grid references, with eastings and northings in yards or meters. Artillery corrections wrote in mils, not degrees, because mils make more sense to steal. You cultivate a little translator in your skull that hears degrees and thinks mils, without anyone having to wag a finger. The translator was expensive at first. Now it works for tips and radio jokes. Light joke 3, your observer sends. Drop 25. And a very earnest gecko on the ridgepole drops a moth that was chewing onto your lap. You inform it the correction was not for them. It stares with eyes that say, "All corrections are local," and resumes dinner. You keep one eye on the clock because the clock is the only honest person in the tent when adrenaline has opinions. You log. Shot. You log. Splash. You log. On. You add the tiny Hogan that means you and the map shared a language just then. When the battery commander, in plainest English, says, "Repeat, fire for effect," you say nothing extra out loud and a small prayer in Navajo under your breath. Let all the decimals be loyal today. The salute, if there is one, will be numbers spoken exactly once. At the end of the mission you don't narrate a triumph. You send, "End of mission, target neutralized," or its agreed cousin, and you let the net exhale like a man loosening a belt one notch after supper. You wet the pencil point and sharpen it against the boot sole so the next thing you write will have crisp edges. You drink a mouthful of canteen water, warm as an old joke, and you turn one line of the page neatly, because neatness is the only celebration that doesn't jinx anything. When quiet returns, it isn't empty, it's earned. The surf resumes its degree in patience. The radio lowers its shoulders. Your ribcage discovers it has been holding a small, unnecessary hill all this time and hands it back to the night. You sit there with your headset slightly askew and the feeling that someone just posted a letter and the world, against odds, delivered it to the correct house. You don't say, "Good shooting," even to yourself. You say, in Navajo, a word for well placed. The same word you might use for a fence post that won't need attention for 20 winters. And then you straighten the pad, touch the pencil to the margin where the tiny dot dried, and make ready for the next address the island will ask you to speak. The map sits quietly under your palm, square and obedient. The sky leans closer as if it has better hearing than rumor gives it. Somewhere a gun crew pours hot coffee into hands that did the math and now deserve a cup. Somewhere the forward observer unfolds himself from behind a stubborn root and grins exactly once. Here, in the tent, you listen, breathe, and prepare to say more numbers like water, no splash, only place. Urging traffic doesn't knock. It leans on the door and tests the hinges. You hear it in the first breath before words. The way a voice sets itself like a runner at the line. The way paper under a hand stops sounding like paper and starts sounding like a plan. Your own mouth does its quiet trick. The throat opens, the shoulders go lighter instead of tighter, and the tone finds the middle register you keep for weather bulletins and newborns. Urgency wants to speed you up. You repay it by becoming smooth. Precedence comes first, as always. Flash. If shells and seconds are discussing marriage, immediate. When minutes are coins you can spend, priority. For the rest of the hurry, and routine, for the good, boring backbone of a day. You don't announce drama. You label the envelope and then read the address. Navajo takes the labels without fuss. You've learned a compact way to signal. Now, truly now. That would make a drummer proud. The net hears the badge, and stations lean back to make room the way people do at a busy door. The map shifts color fast at night. Tracer lines sketched with impatient chalk, bonfires where there should be none, a new gun pit waking up under a palm's shadow. The observer squeezes his voice down to its cleanest edge. Bearing range, fire for effect. You breathe once, in through the nose, your grandmother's trick, and Navajo leaves your mouth like a river that has somewhere to be. Digits in pairs. Correction words trimmed to the bone. No adjectives unless the gun crew needs a picture to aim at, and even then the picture fits in a teacup. Mainstream fact taps your logbook. U.S. message precedence doctrine in World War II generally defined flash for messages requiring immediate action with handling time measured in minutes. Immediate, within 30 minutes. Priority, within a few hours. And routine, as capacity allowed. Code talkers worked inside the same system, with the added velocity of sending operationally sensitive content in. Navajo without a cryptographic bottleneck. On the worst days, a battery might ride, immediate, up to the edge of flash, and rely on you to make the border feel like it didn't exist. Emergency has its own rituals and none of them include shouting. A medevac call arrives square-shouldered and wearing urgency like a coat. Grid, wound, litter or walking, landing zone if someone has bullied the jungle into a clearing. You strip every sentence to muscle and send the request on the shortest path. Navajo for the key data. Then the agreed plain English pro words any pilot overhead will understand. You write the time the way a clerk would, exact, unloud, complete. Because later someone will count backwards to understand how fast help learned to run. Light joke one arrives uninvited and you let it. Humor is a first aid kit you keep in the top pocket. You tell the set, under your breath, that if it keeps the antenna dry for 5 more minutes, you'll promote it to chaplain. The set, in a rare display of piety, reduces the hiss and lets a corpseman's reply climb the ladder without stumbling. Sometimes urgency looks like silence that refuses to answer. A station you love goes missing for 5 beats, 10. You try the secondary frequency, clean and simple, no commentary. You give a 1-syllable prod and then you wait the full count because discipline is the only bridle Knight respects. On beat 11 he returns, breathing harder, words shortened to fit through a smaller door, and your body stops holding its own shoulders up by force. He sends, danger close. You make the pencil larger without letting the voice grow teeth. You do not repeat the phrase to the net. You pass only the math it requires, and the battery's tubes take the hint and begin their sermon. The set itself can cause emergencies with the petty inventiveness of small gods. A tube leans, a connector sulks, a gust jerks the aerial like a fisherman with opinions. You have the muscle memory fixes, a thumb twist, a spare tube warmed in a pocket, the antenna wire tossed to a friendlier branch. Quirky tidbit, you keep a felt washer in your wallet, the punched-out eye from a bootlace pad, and slip it under the key now and then to damp the click when secrecy, nerves, or a nearby sentry wants fewer sounds. The washer smells faintly of polish and luck. Both seem to work. The maps really change color when flares write adjectives no one asked for. An observer calls. Shift, 2 guns, rapid, and your mouth becomes a metronome. Navajo doesn't stumble. It never does when it belongs to the bone. Add 50, write 20. You send. Repeat, fire for effect. Returns. You keep the corridor clear. No filler, no congratulations, only air. Your pencil writes. Shot, splash, and a tick when the world says, on. If someone in the line whispers, thank you, into the same air a second later, you pretend the radio didn't hear it to keep the net from picking up your softness. Historians still argue whether speed itself, Not only security was the decisive edge the code talkers gave at the tactical level, whether shaving minutes from the chains saved more lives than perfect secrecy, or whether the two advantages were inseparable. Speed permitted by security, security proven by speed. You decide arguments are for afternoons with chalkboards. Nights like this prefer verifiable verbs, sent, received, adjusted on. Urgent air support traffic changes the music but not the posture. A pilot checks in on VHF and you're set, on its best behavior, passes the ground picture with coordinates and a tidy target cue, no drama, a hint of Navajo where secrecy helps, plain English where the joint net demands it. You do not try to sound like a director. You sound like a librarian handing a book to a man who wants the right chapter fast. Light joke too. Later, the pilot will tell you he pictured your voice wearing spectacles. You'll tell him you pictured his aircraft wearing earmuffs. Both images are true enough to keep as souvenirs. Confusion loves a crowded band. Two stations step on each other. You give them a quiet, precise, one at a time. In Navajo first, then the agreed plain pro-word for the non-Navajo set that wandered into your doorway. They separate like polite guests at a buffet. One repeats from first pair. The other waits, learns patience, and thanks you by not doing it again for an hour. When the map's edges go ragged, smoke, dust, rain turning numbers into rumors, you add structure, not volume. Say again from northing, I have last digit, confirm bearing only. Each exact byte puts the picture back together until the artillery can see well enough to do its work. You are not the painter. You are the frame that keeps the canvas square while the brush finds its lines. Mainstream aside enters with clean boots. On Iwo Jima, Major Howard Connor famously remarked that, were it not for the Navajos, the Marines would never have taken Iwo Jima. A sentiment often quoted to capture the practical value of speed and clarity in the worst 48 hours a map can endure. You don't repeat the line in the tent. It would put too much weight on the air. But you file it in the drawer where compliments become chores. Be that useful again, and again, without becoming impressed with yourself. Light joke 3 keeps your hands from stiffening. Your partner bets you a ration of peaches you can't send a full, immediate, traffic block, precedence, grid, description, corrections, without a single extra syllable. You do it. He sighs like a man who enjoys losing when it improves the net, splits the peaches fairly, and the geckos, who consider peaches to be moths that forgot to grow wings, arrive to audit your division of spoils. The line between urgency and panic is thinner than paper and stronger than rope. You keep it by writing beautifully. Your log, time, origin, destination, gist, is so neat a schoolteacher would let it grade itself. Later, when a staffer reconstructs the hour, he will read your figures and hear calm where there had been none. He will not know about the one breath you took that tasted like tin. He doesn't need to. Sometimes the fastest thing you can do is say, wait, once, and then truly wait. The set cools its hiss. The observer sees the thing he needed to see. The battery aligns the last whisper of elevation. Then you send one clean correction, and the world moves the way it was supposed to from the start. Discipline is a kind of kindness tools understand. When the surge passes, you feel it in your back before you feel it in your ears. The tent is suddenly larger. The surf returns from wherever it went to count. You drink canteen water, and it tastes like canteen water again, not like a clock. You draw the tiny Hogan in the corner of the page, your private mark for urgent, quiet, done. Outside, a breeze moves the palm fronds just enough to make the moon stutter. Inside, the set hums a lower note, content to wait for whatever the next minute intends to bring you with its proper label. You adjust the headset, rub the pencil's gray from your finger onto your trouser seam, and feel your voice settle back into its idle. Urgent traffic will come again. It always does, the night being generous with tests. You will answer with the same posture, the same river, the same refusal to be interesting. Urgency can keep its metaphors. You keep your nouns tidy, grid, range, time, and hand them over like medicine measured by someone who loves accuracy more than applause. Lantern light is the kind of teacher who keeps its voice down so you'll lean in. You and your partner squat at a crate the island has promoted to desk, the lantern hooded to a keyhole of glow, the radio set humming like a contented kettle, and the page under your pencil divided into imaginary lanes, one for letters, one for words, one for the small marks that mean, try again but faster. You warm the mouth with easy creatures, ant, bear, corn, deer, switch, apple, badger, cedar, dog, switch again until your tongue forgets it ever liked the same path twice. Speed isn't sprinting, it's smooth. So you practice smooth until even the geckos yawn politely. You trade roles because right brains enjoy new chairs. For 5 minutes you send, he copies. For 5 minutes he sends, you copy. Neither of you raise your voice. You never practice loud. You practice inevitable. The lantern turns each of your syllables into a tiny gold coin and sets them on the table one by one. You try not to drop any. Your jaw learns to move less. Your breath learns to sit lower. Your pencil learns a short, graceful arc so it doesn't scrape like a trowel. You time yourselves with the oldest clock. How long until the candle rivulet reaches the line scratched around the tin? And you shave seconds not by hurrying but by trimming every needless turn from the river. Mainstream fact sets its elbows neatly on the crate. During stateside trials in 1942, code talkers sent a 3-line message in roughly 20 seconds that took conventional encryption and decryption several minutes. In the Pacific, multi-sentence fire missions routinely moved mouth to gun. In under 2 minutes when trained pairs ran clean. You remember the day an instructor made you read that fact out loud and then asked, "Can you be that boringly excellent under a poncho in the rain?" Tonight's answer is a lantern and a page filling with tidy creatures. You invent drills so the brain doesn't get bored and wander off to critique the moon. One is, reverse river. You spell a word forward once, backward once, then forward again without tripping. The alphabet drawer applause is silent but real. Another is, fast cousins. Hummingbird becomes fierce, small bird becomes quick wing. And your partner has to accept any of the three as long as you never run the same synonym too long. There's single pair rescue. You send 2 5-digit groups and deliberately smear 1 digit in static. He must ask only for the lost crumb, not the whole loaf. You rate that 1 5 lanterns for usefulness and 1 for fun, because fun shows up last but works hard when it gets there. Light joke 1. A sergeant caught you practicing to the canteen's drip. Plink, plink, pause, and accused you of using contraband metronomes. You saluted with the canteen. He sentenced you to 12 more plinks. You complied, the drip complied, and the drill turned into a camp rumor that you could send at exactly canteen speed, which is, in fairness, very precise if your canteen has opinions. You build speed by removing thoughts you don't need. You stop holding words in your mouth while you write. You let the hand write the previous breath while the mouth is already forming the next. You stop translating even a little. You think in Navajo, and the English part of the brain clocks off to go play with vocabulary in its own time. You stop asking yourself whether you said that vowel perfectly and let the language prove, again, that perfect is less important than exact. Exact has a quieter shine. Quirky tidbit flutters into the tent. One of the old hands keeps a domino tile, blank on one end, 6 on the other, in his pocket. When he wants to practice speed with stakes, he sets it 6 up. When he's tired but knows he should keep the habit, he sets it blank side up and permits himself to treat it like a slow coin. No manual endorses the domino. Everyone who has borrowed it returns it with the kind of reverence ordinarily reserved for lucky rabbits' feet and uncomplaining fountain pens. You and your partner adopt Lantern Pro words that only the two of you understand. tiny implied nudges that stay off the net. If he breathes a hair longer before a new group, you know he wants you to send one synonym instead of another. If you raise the pencil a finger width, he knows to start spelling instead of naming. It isn't showy, it's duet etiquette. On rain nights you both lean in until your foreheads accidentally bump and you try to pretend it was tactical. Light joke 2, you label the maneuver, forehead authentication, in the margin. The lantern reads the sarcasm and does not flicker, which is professionalism. Historians still argue whether memorization drills like these improved accuracy under fire or risked sending the brain into autopilot at the worst possible time. Whether muscle memory saved more digits than it dropped, or whether novelty, the constant introduction of new synonyms, kept the mind elastic enough to avoid ruts. You vote with your jaw, practice both ways. Run the familiar until the mouth can answer while the hand ties a boot. Throw a curveball synonym every other line so the brain stays awake without getting nervous. The lantern, impartial, applauds by not going out. Sometimes you turn the lantern down until the world is nearly only sound. You and he send in the dark, hands memorizing the page edges, pencil trusting the soft scrape, mouths finding consonants by feel. With sight dismissed, hearing gets taller. The set's hiss becomes a low road. Your partner's voice becomes a small round stone rolling downhill without pause. When you turn the wick up again, the page is full and neat, and you both feel like you napped instead of worked. The sergeant calls that good tired, which is what you call a day's woodpile stacked right the first time. Mainstream aside, pocket version, the earliest classes at Camp Elliott used blackboards and chalk for these drills, growing speed and steadiness before anyone wore a radio. Overseas, pairs often practiced off-shift to lanterns, candles, or filtered flashlights under ponchos to keep eyes tuned to night and mouths tuned to soft diction. The rule that frowned on paper codebooks did not frown on paper practice, so long as the practice burned to ash or disappeared into pockets at the end of the hour. You've watched a dozen perfect pages become warmth for a dozen cold hands. No one missed the paper afterward. The muscle had learned. Speed has cousins named clarity and courtesy. You learn to cut your creatures where the other man hears clean syllable boundaries. You learn that some synonyms, clever in daylight, turn muddy when rain climbs into the wire. You write a small blacklist in the head. Never use crow when owl will do at night. Never use river words in a storm that already has one. Retire a favorite ant for a week if you catch yourself becoming predictable. The discipline is less about quantity and more about the shape of sound in bad weather. Light joke 3. Your partner challenges you to send a pangram in Navajo creatures. Every letter represented at least once, in under a minute. You do it in 58 seconds and then both of you laugh because the only person who will ever care about that achievement is the lantern, and it refuses to clap. You draw a tiny lantern in the margin anyway and promote it to Timekeeper Second Class. The best drill is the one that sneaks out into the field without making a fuss. During a lull, while the net minders breathe and the surf conducts its eternal rehearsal, you tilt your head and send each other nonsense. Safe, tiny, nothing messages, at the day's working speed. If you drop a syllable, you both hear it. If you don't, you both feel the little click that marks a clean gear change. You do not log these. You wouldn't insult them with ink. They're the push-ups you refuse to count because counting would scare them away. You also practice being interrupted. He starts a word. You cut it for a simulated break, then resume mid-syllable as if the world never barged in. You drop a pencil on purpose and practice retrieving the digit you lost, without asking for the whole string. You cough and keep your vowels round. You swat a mosquito with the back of the knuckles and don't let the consonant feel slapped. It's silliness in the tent, it's sanity in the field. Quirky tidbit number 2, one pair swears by bean drills, a line of dried beans set in a row. After each flawless group, move one bean to a second row. If you stumble, pay a bean back. The goal is to migrate 10 beans in 10 minutes and go to sleep feeling like the world kept promises. The mess sergeant claims this has reduced midnight bean theft. The mess sergeant is wrong. It has only professionalized it. Sometimes the lantern throws a shadow exactly like your grandmother's shoulder, and you remember the first time someone taught you to speak slowly enough that a child would not feel hurried and fast enough that a storm would not catch you halfway to the hogan. You pair that memory with the grid you will send if dawn brings a reason. The two fit together like beadwork, pattern concealed until the whole thing lies finished in the palm. Historians still argue whether the pairs mattered more than the individual, whether the real unit of excellence was two minds drilled together until they could pass thought like a relay baton without fingerprints. You prefer the plural. We is faster. We drops fewer syllables. We remembers better when sleep gets stingy. You write it small on the margin next to the lantern doodle. We. The lantern gutters once, twice, then remembers its manners. You blow it out on purpose to practice the dark, and the island applauds with a frog in perfect time. In the sudden near black, your partner says a gentle nonsense word in Navajo that means again. You answer with a nonsense word that means still. The set hums approval. The page receives one last clean line you won't keep. The pencil rests across the crate like a baton placed on the right hook. When you let the tent go quiet, the drills keep walking somewhere in your bones. Soft feet, good shoes, no hurry, no show. You stretch your jaw until it finds its relaxed hinge. You put the pencil behind your ear because that is where pencils sleep. The lantern, off now, continues to give the faintest smell of warmth, the way a radio does when its filaments finish remembering fire. You step outside and the stars have their own drills. Rise, burn, sink, done to time you can't measure and a patience you can. Your mouth feels ready for anything shorter than forever. That will do. Secrecy, for you, doesn't feel like a lock, it feels like posture. You hold the thought in the language that grew your mouth and then you let it out whole, never asking English to chaperone it across the room. When you think Navajo, then say Navajo, the message moves like an eel through water, natural, slippery to hands that don't know how to hold it, impossible to flatten long enough for an enemy to pin with a label. Translating would be like asking the eel to walk. Both of you would become clumsy and loud. So you keep the thought in its original shape and let secrecy rest there, quiet and strong. Security on the wire is not a single trick, it's a braid. First strand, no paper. You carry your book behind your teeth and inside the hands that can send before the pencil catches up. There is no key list to fall out of a pocket, no index card to get persuaded by rain, no manual to be forgotten in a foxhole and discovered by a very patient corporal with the wrong flag on his sleeve. Second strand, habit. You refuse to repeat the same synonym all week. You shuffle ant and apple and arrow so no pattern grows fat enough to feed an analyst. And you keep the alphabet drawer messy on purpose. Third strand, silence. You speak only when the net needs you, and you make each message tidy enough that an enemy direction finder hears nothing but the briefest heartbeat and then a gone. Mainstream fact sits down politely at the edge of your table. The Navajo code was never broken by Japanese cryptanalysts during the war. Beyond the language's complexity, tones, nasalization, verb structures. Operational rules ban written codebooks in combat and enforced rapid, varied phrasing, leaving no predictable sample for enemy linguists to grab. Captured radios and recordings produced curiosity, not comprehension. That steadies your hand in the dark. You do not imagine a pair of clever ears across the water reading over your shoulder while you write. You teach yourself to hear the difference between secure and careless. Secure sounds like a short, exact message spoken once. Careless sounds like two repeats, a filler word, and a polite ad-lib because you were enjoying the sound of your own competence. Secure feels like a well-made knot. Careless feels like a knot you will have to look at later and explain. So you tie only the knots you need and cut the rope flush. You also memorize the impatience of ignorance. The Japanese language officers who might have been assigned to your rhythm would have had to learn not just vocabulary but a living verb system, not just nouns but the ways your elders tuck meaning into direction, motion, duration, stress. Then learn your code's deliberately shifted meanings. Then learn that you shuffle synonyms. Then train their mouths to hear through jungle static. Historians still argue whether Axis failure owed more to lack of access to fluent Navajo speakers, to late and limited priority given to Indian languages in the enemy intelligence apparatus, or to your operational discipline denying them enough samples to practice on. You carry the argument like a spare pencil, useful, but not necessary to tonight's work. Whatever the reason, your eel swims unseen. Obsect bleeds into the small domestic tasks. You don't leave a pad face up. You don't pin your call sign over your bunk like a movie poster. You don't tell a curious clerk the clever way you remember K from Q. You burn scrap when the lantern has opinions. You stop your hand halfway to the log when it tries to grow a third adjective. You remind your mouth that simple is a kind of armor. Light joke 1. When a visiting officer asks, "How do you keep secrets?" You answer, perfectly truthfully, "By not telling them." And he nods like you've given him a classified Zen koan. You do not invoice for philosophy. The radio itself has a privacy voice you learn to match. You keep the mic close enough for intimacy but far enough to avoid breath that sounds like waves. You hold the gain just under show off, so the words remain round but not shouty. You resist the urge to fill silence with throat clearing, because the air doesn't need proof of life and the enemy's antenna would love it. Emkin is not a suggestion, it's a weather report for your manners. When the order is, "Speak little," you turn your messages into paper birds, precise folds, one good launch, no circling, quirky tidbit. One code talker you know keeps a pebble in his left pocket. Before each message, he rolls it once between finger and thumb. Not superstition, exactly. Discipline disguised as comfort. The pebble says, "Say it once," and if he says it twice, the pebble gets fired into the lagoon for the night. He has only thrown the pebble away twice. The lagoon, generous, seems to return it by morning. Every pebble feels the same to a hand that has learned to be calm. You refuse to become the story inside your own tent. You do the dull things well, challenge and reply at the correct intervals, authentication crisp and uninteresting, call signs not sung but spoken, frequency changes handled like a librarian passing a book she is fond of to a reader she trusts. You never explain to a new man how clever the system is. You make him practice until he finds out it doesn't need cleverness, only steadiness. Cleverness leaks. Steadiness doesn't. Thinking natively also prevents an old kind of trouble, false friends. English wants to map a noun onto a noun, a tidy one-for-one. Navajo prefers actions and relations. Your verbs wear the world like a coat. If you were to translate under stress, some English corner of you would be tempted to pull a too-tight jacket sleeve, close, but wrong. Thinking in Navajo, you go straight to the motion the gun needs or the shape of the place the map demands. The sentence arrives honest, without squeaks, and an eavesdropper's pencil, chasing English, scribbles itself into a knot. Light joke 2. Once, a well-meaning clerk asked if you could write the code down for the archives, just in case. You said, "We keep it in a safer place," and tapped your head. He said, "But what if you forget?" You said, "Then the enemy will be thrilled to learn that the forward observer is now ordering pies." He promised to stop asking. He did not stop wanting pies. You carry decoys in your pocket that no one can see. The urge to tell a long story, the pride of being quick, the little voice that likes a flourish. You pat them like you pat a curious dog, not now, and keep the gate latched. On a quiet hour, you and your partner review forbidden habits like two old aunties making a list of young cousins' vices. No telling the same synonym more than thrice in a page. No, and then, when a period will do. No favorite creature so beloved it moves into the tent. You swear these oaths with dry mouths and then pay them with obedience, which is the currency of secrecy. Mainstream fact, folded into doctrine, captured Navajo code talkers, on the rare occasions they were taken, were reported to have refused to assist enemy translators. Even if coerced, a single speaker could not deliver a book, because no book existed and the code's values shifted by design. Operational reports emphasized that success depended on teams, on rehearsed pairs, and on keeping the code in constant motion so even an honest ear could not catalog it in time to matter. Your job, then, is not to be unbreakable in theory but to be uncatchable in practice. Historians still argue whether absolute secrecy mattered more than practical delay, whether an unbroken code that slowed an enemy by hours was functionally equal to one that could never be learned, or whether the psychological certainty of never broken did its own morale work up and down the chain. You understand morale as the way a set hums under a steady hand. Never broken is a fine headline. Fast enough that nothing bad happened is the one you write small in your log. You find security in small courtesies. You never speak another operator's real name on the air. You do not gossip grid references across tents. You fold the log cover over the last line before you set it down. You turn the lantern away from the page as if it could read. You keep your kit tidy enough that if someone else has to use your station, they can find the headset and not your secrets. Light joke 3. You label a blank page, top secret, so any curious gecko will waste its time. The gecko walks across it, signs with dusty feet, and leaves satisfied. Even your handwriting hides your meaning from enemy eyes. The gist column uses plain English that would bore a spy. Grid sent adjust on, while the Navajo particulars live in your mouth and vanish into air. Seconds later, only the meters and mils remain, retranslated into metal and concussion on a hill that misbehaved. The code is a dragonfly over water, there for a blink, then gone, leaving only rings. Once, at dawn, after a long night of careful words, a visiting signals officer asked what you'd done to make the code safe. You pointed to your head, your chest, your partner's head, his chest, the set, the aerial, the log, the horizon. All of it, you said. He nodded, wrote something down, and wandered off to find coffee. You hoped he wrote discipline, and not mysticism. Either way, the sun came up, which is all the applause secrecy ever needs. When you pull the headset half off to scratch an ear, you hear how big the ocean is and how small a message can be and still matter. You put the cup back on, and your language returns to the circuit like a bird to a wire, balanced, unremarkable, very hard to catch. You send a test word, he replies, the net breathes, and the eel swims another quiet lap where it belongs, in clear water, unhurried, invisible to anyone who didn't grow up knowing what water is. Buddy watches how you turn one pair of eyes into four and two brains into something that doesn't miss corners. You sit with the headset cupping one ear, and your partner sits with his back angled to the tent flap where the wind brings news before voices do. One of you listens to people and electricity. The other listens to weather and footsteps and the particular way palm fronds mumble when a shape they don't know walks underneath. You trade every so often, not by ceremony but by a small touch, the back of a knuckle on a sleeve, a pencil-handed handle first, a breath that means, your turn. The set hums, the surf counts to 3 forever, and your shift becomes a duet that would bore an audience, and therefore pleases you very much. You decide early that jokes are not decorations, they are tools. You keep them small and round-edged, the kind that can roll around the foxhole without cutting anyone, and you use them to keep eyelids polite. You say, in Navajo, a nonsense line that means, "The moon filed its report on time," and your partner answers with one that means, "The stars countersigned." It's nothing and it's everything, a tiny hinge that lets attention swing wide again. Light joke 1. You promote the gecko on the ridgepole to night operations officer. He accepts, chews a moth ceremonially, and declines further responsibility. Work divides itself naturally if you let it. The headset man owns the clock and the log. He calls time checks on the hour, trims the dial when he drifts it like a drowsy boat, and keeps the pencil from telling stories by making sure it writes only numbers and gists. The watcher owns the horizon. He walks the few paces out to where the palms make a frame, stands long enough to let his eyes stop being American and start being island, and then returns with a weather that has sentences. Cloud building south, green flash tonight if we're kind, black line far out, maybe rain. When he sits, he keeps the hand mic within reach, because Buddy Watch is not strict. If a shout arrives, you both become hands. Mainstream fact: Marines institutionalized two-man teams across jobs that loved failure least. Machine guns, radios, scouts. Because redundancy is the only romance war can afford. Among code talkers, pairs who trained together at Camp Elliott and then shipped out together kept their speed in the field. Their practice drills. Send copy, copy send. Translated into hours where letters and numbers move like one person thinking out loud. Some units put a third man on the position at night, one listening, one scanning, one sleeping on purpose so the nap could be shared like rations without guilt. You like the math of that. Divide fatigue by 3, multiply clarity by 2. You and your partner agree on hand signals that would confuse anyone who hasn't spent 100 hours being bored next to the same radio. Index finger taps the log's margin twice. Repeat last pair. Flat hand sweeping right. Tune 2 lines up, he slipped. Chin lift toward the beach. That's weather, not engines. A little circle drawn on the page with the pencil eraser. Take a sip. No one wrote these in a manual. The lantern approved them by not going out while you tested them. Buddy Watch also means trading stubbornness. If the listener grows proud of his steadiness and refuses to blink, the watcher blinks for both and then taps him out. If the watcher collects too many clouds in his head and forgets the set is sometimes more honest than the horizon, the listener points at the dial and says, with eyebrows only, "Come home." Quirky tidbit: your pair keeps a smooth pebble that looks like a small potato. Whoever's turn it is to shut up and breathe for 60 seconds gets the pebble. It lives on the crate between you and makes a soft clink when set down, a sound that has become the camp's unofficial punctuation mark for enough. Fatigue is an animal you don't shame, you simply feed it practicalities. You nibble a ration biscuit quietly at 15 past the hour because the clock is how you avoid arguments with appetite. You let the watcher roll his shoulders every time a check-in arrives, not because they're sore but because rituals glue attention back where it belongs. You both take turns telling a 3-sentence story from home that has no plot. Roasting corn, dogs sleeping in dust, a cousin who sings off-key when she shells, because stories smooth the edges without turning into longing. Light joke 2, you insist the dog learn Morse. Your partner insists the dog only knew food. You compromise at food now. Sometimes the best buddy watch is silent agreement about the kind of quiet you'll keep. You both decide neither of you will say, "I'm tired," after midnight, not because you're heroes but because the sentence invites a yawn. Instead, you'll say, "Change chairs," and change chairs you do, listener to watcher, watcher to listener, and the furniture does the rest. You refuse to play music even if someone gifts you a forbidden harmonica. The island already has a ban. You decline to whisper names of places you'll go when this is over. The map is listening and would prefer you to stick to grid squares. Historians still argue whether the pair mattered more than the gear. If two careful people with a temperamental set beat one genius with perfect equipment, or whether the real advantage was that paired minds could catch each other's slips before the world had to. You filed the debate under experience. The one time you tried to run a late hour alone, Watcher went to fetch a battery, said hummed. Surf got loud. You dropped a digit and had to ask for it back. Not a disaster. But the pebble between you has never looked so kind as when the other hand returned and set it down exactly in the middle. The net benefits from two kinds of ears. The listener hears friction in a vowel, a sign the other station moved a hair off frequency, and makes the correction before a repeat is needed. The watcher hears friction in the leaves, a sign someone is walking where no one should, and steps one pace to the tent flap with the headset half off and a polite readiness that keeps 3 bad minutes from happening. The set rewards the conspiracy by behaving better than it's designed to, as if steel appreciates being taken seriously by two people at once. You schedule micro breaks like accountants. On the hour, the watcher does 30 seconds of stargazing, with purpose, not romance, to reset the pupils. At 30, the listener takes a half-minute to close both eyes and count the surf to 3 cycles, headset still on, jaw loose, hands ready. You discovered this stunt by accident when a fly decided to practice runway approaches on your eyelashes. The blink you invented to shoo it away saved the next 15 minutes from turning scratchy. You put it in the drill book you keep in your minds. Blink on purpose. Light joke 3. Once, a lieutenant wandered in and asked who was in charge. You pointed at the pebble. Your partner saluted it. The lieutenant, to his credit, saluted too and left slowly, as if backing away from a local deity. You promoted the pebble to Sergeant Temporary. It behaved with the dignity of stone. There are hours when buddy watch becomes handover without moving places. A big message arrives, and the listener begins it, but halfway through his pencil breaks itself on a digit it doesn't like and the watcher's pencil arrives in his fingers before the sentence even notices the hand changed. This is not magic. It is the result of 100 lantern drills and 1,000 nonsense lines sent to the beat of a canteen drip. Later, in daylight, you will try to demonstrate this to a clerk and fail. The trick refuses to perform for audiences. Good. Let it stay shy. Mainstream fact in a soft voice. On Iwo Jima, pairs and small teams of code talkers rotated within positions to keep endurance while maintaining speed. Reports described continuous operation under fire with a smoothness that made fatigue-proof sound like a design feature. A photograph shows 2 men in a shallow pit, one at the handset, one scanning with a jaw like a hinge. No caption about pebble sergeants, but you can see the idea in their shoulders: shared duty, shared stillness. You keep your buddy awake with inventories disguised as jokes. Name 5 words for East your grandmother would accept. Name 3 reasons the moon looks like a report card. What 5 things in this tent could be turned into an antenna in a sulk? He answers, not because the questions matter, but because waking the naming part of the brain keeps the eyelids from negotiating with gravity. You take turns inventing rules you'll later deny. Any man who says Roger twice owes the other coffee. Any man who uses the same ad twice buys peaches. And somehow the rules make the hour straight in its tie. Quirky tidbit 2. You sew 2 tiny stitches of bright thread, one red, one green, on the edge of the log's canvas cover where only you and your partner know to look. Red means you're listening. Green means you're watching. You flip them at each changeover with the same satisfaction a switch must feel when it gets its own way. It is nothing. It is also everything, because attention wears colors better than fatigue does. When relief arrives, you do not spring up as if chairs burned you. You finish a line to the end of its breadth, you set the pencil where tomorrow's hand will expect to find it, and you tell the new pair one sentence of weather that is not a lecture. Horizon steady, 1 cloud tall south. Your partner hands over the pebble like a family heirloom. The set hums the same note for new ears. The surf, which does not care who listens as long as someone does, keeps its degree. You step outside together because buddy watch ends as it lived, 2 at a time. The palms imitate applause with their fronds. The sky performs that pale trick it learned before people named it, blue leaking under black at the seam. You split the last of the canteen with the fairness earned by hours where digits were split as evenly. You say nothing for a stretch that would make talkers nervous and your grandmother proud. Then, because someone must, your partner says simply, "Good net." You nod. The pebble in your pocket agrees by being exactly the weight you remember. Back in the tent, the new listener is already nudging the dial the way you like to nudge it, and the new watcher has adopted the palm you just trained to be a weather vane. You tuck the log corner under, a small origami of closure, and catch yourself smiling at a future where no one will know that a rock kept 2 men honest through a long night. That is fine. The rock knows. So does the surf. So does the set, which, being a machine, will never write a letter of recommendation and will never forget your hands. Home arrives without luggage. One moment you're a pair of ears in a canvas box. The next, a smell walks into the flap that isn't here at all. Roasting corn, just beginning to sweeten, the smoke a little sticky the way mesquite gets when a cousin turns his back to tease the dog. You keep the headset on and let the memory sit on the bench like a quiet visitor. Sheet bells across the brainpan count time as gently as the surf does outside. 2 pause, 2 pause. You send a test word across the net, plain, correct, nothing sentimental, and tuck a small hello into the silence after it, the same way a mother slips a bead into a child's pocket before school. Nobody hears it but you. That's enough. Night makes space for home better than day. Under sunlight you are a schedule with a spine. After midnight the world lengthens until there's room for a kitchen door that squeaks and a ladder that leads to your grandmother's roof, the way it creaked when you were small and taller people climbed it to tell a story to the moon. Your partner, seeing your jaw go soft, says nothing and slides the canteen lid toward your hand as if he were passing salt at supper. You drink, nod, and let the sizzle of far-off surf become bacon on a winter griddle for a full heartbeat before the set calls you back to numbers. Light joke 1. You tell the ocean it cooks a decent breakfast. It answers with a wave that sounds like, "Eat before it gets cold." Mainstream fact sits down beside the memory without jostling it. Wartime letters, V-mail photographs of handwriting shrunk to negatives, then re-enlarged, were censored for positions and schedules, so code talkers, like everyone else, wrote around the edges of where and when. You mention weather the way people do when they are really naming feelings. You list food the way people do when home has a stove. You tell a small joke about a gecko that thinks it outranks you, and your mother reads between the lines and sends a line back that smells of dust after rain. The letter becomes a pocket-sized hogan you can open any time the set's filaments make the tent warmer than the island air. You stock your head with ordinary. It helps. You rehearse the sound of a bucket's iron handle on a well's wooden lip. You practice the weight of a woven water jar on one hip, the side-to-side sway that keeps a person upright without making a song of it. You revisit the small triangle of shade where a lamb thinks it can hide behind itself. None of this slows your mouth when a grid arrives. If anything, it gives your vowels places to sit so they don't trip over urgency. Home is ballast, not anchor. There's a ceremony to the post that beats rank every time. A corporal arrives with a sack that looks like an errant laundry bag and becomes a procession of necks and hands. You sit on your crate like a schoolba and tear open a V-mail that got a nosebleed going through all those machines and still behaves like a voice. You read it twice the way you read a map when you're tired, first for the big shapes, Your uncle mended the fence, your auntie traded for good melons, the old dog sleeps by the north wall now. Bend for the tiny lines. We laughed when the goat escaped, yeah, don't get thin. We counted stars and you were not missing. You fold the paper into a square the radio can share a table with, and the set approves by humming the key of home for a whole minute. Quirky tidbit. You keep a twist of pinion nuts in a tobacco tin that says something bossy in English on the lid and something kinder in smell when you crack it. On tired nights you trade one nut for one clean message. Crunch, send, crunch, copy, until the math looks favorable. Your partner swears by a different system, a dry chili, one lick per correction, no more, no less, because discipline should sting just a little. The chili, consulted, declines commentary but radiates policy. Sometimes the island lets you hear home in the gear. A loose cover sings in a note 1/2 step from the pitch your cousin used when he called sheep in at sundown. You tighten the screw and feel an ache you did not plan for climb the ladder of your ribs. You tell it to sit down and share the bench with the corn smoke. It does, because aches raised right mind their manners. Historians still argue whether service far from dying by Kia pulled language and ceremony away from young men, assimilation by boot polish and radio discipline, or whether the work hardened both the tongue and the pride that carried it, preservation sharpened by purpose. Did the court teach English deeper, or did the war send Navajo home with reasons to keep Navajo taller? You filed the debate under both, and because you have seen a man shave to regulation with a steel mirror and then close his eyes and say a prayer that did not require translation. The radio never asks you to choose. It asks you to be quick in one language so others can live long in another. There is a particular hour, just before the moon stoops low enough to put a thumbprint on the lagoon, when the tent smells almost like wet clay under fingernails after a summer storm. You know this is nonsense. Your hands hold pencil and cord, not pottery. The nose disagrees, and the memory of building a small dish with a patient ant, pinch, turn, walks in with clay feet and sits down. You breathe once, remember to breathe again, and the next coordinate you send goes out as neatly as a coil set true against itself. Light joke too. You promise the set that when you get home you'll teach it to pronounce kneaded bread in Navajo if it will stop chewing your consonants during rain. The set, a realist, keeps its own counsel and eats one more consonant for emphasis. You feed it a slower breath and it belches politely, which in radio is called better audio. Censorship makes comedians of us all. You write your sister that the boys in your club are eating well. Hardtack has its own dictionary, and she writes back that the girls in her club are teasing goats, which is code for don't forget who you belong to. You draw a small L in the margin that the censor will let pass, and your sister will translate as eyes open at night. Behind the owl you draw a dot your mother would understand as I am here. A hieroglyph family invented, blessed by nobody, invincible to erasers. Mainstream fact underlines itself in your memory. Some code talkers took part in ceremonies before shipping out, blessings for travel, prayers for good words and safe returns, and some carried tiny pouches of pollen or turquoise under their shirts. The Corps did not issue such items, but the war already knew how to make room for small private armor. You carry yours where a dog tag would rattle against it, and tell each to mind its own job. They do. Radio waves make poets of scientists. You find yourself thinking that static is what wool sounds like when a sheep tries to talk overseas and can't, quite. You imagine your grandfather sitting by a window counting both your stars and his, matching them in case they try to wander. You send a coordinate, and every vowel is a footstep on packed dirt outside the hogan, each consonant a glance at sky to judge weather. None of that shows in the log, all of it steadies the hand. Light joke 3. Your partner bets you a stick of gum you can't sneak the word for mutton stew into a check-in without the net noticing. You can, but you don't. Because you are a professional and because the word would make both of you cruelly hungry. You accept the gum anyway on the grounds that refraining is a form of skill. He agrees and chews in solidarity. The set, tired, leans the hair left on the dial and you bring it back like a horse's head with 2 fingers and a story. You tell it, silently, so the net won't be jealous, about your aunt's loom and the pattern that only looks like geometry until you notice that each diamond is a breath, each breath is a day, each day is a mile. The radio pretends not to listen and then holds frequency better than it did an hour ago. Machines are snobs. They respond to craft. Letters arrive whenever ships remember to be generous. You share yours if the room asks, not the secrets, which don't exist, but the flavor. A man from Oklahoma listens to your mother's handwriting the way a thirsty person listens to a stream. You return the favor when his Aunt Ida reports on biscuits. Bread is diplomacy that needs no interpreter. Someone produces a pencil stub and you all write your names on a paper scrap in 6 different alphabets. The scrap looks like a map of a country nobody has drawn yet and you agree, silently, to be citizens. Historians still argue whether the war gave young Dine new roads home, GI Bill schooling, diesel jobs, radios on trucks, or mostly new distances, measured in years away and habits that didn't fit inside Hogan doors. You plan a compromise your grandmother would approve, bring the useful things back, discipline, how to fix a switch with a fingernail, leave the noisy ones at the beach, swearing at weather, swearing at machines, and teach the radio to say thank you by making it quiet when it should be. At the end of the hour you fold the V-mail back into its envelope like a blanket, fold the memory of corn smoke under your tongue for later, and return to the net with a voice that fits both rooms, home and here, at once. You send one more small, exact sentence and the island approves by not moving. The surf keeps counting sheep. The gecko, promoted beyond useful rank, salutes you with a tail twitch and eats a moth large enough to qualify as supper. Before you sleep, later, when the watch is someone else's to hold, you'll look up and count 7 stars in a row and say their names in Navajo the way an elder would when he wants the night to remember itself. For now, you draw the tiny Hogan mark at the page's corner and, next to it, a smaller dot only you will notice. It means you sent a hello home without using any ink, and the hello arrived, because that is what radios do when hearts behave, carry small things a long way, without spilling. Handoff begins long before hands touch anything. You feel the hour thinning, the way a wick shortens just enough that the lantern's voice grows thoughtful, and you start making the tent ready for the next pair as if you were setting a table for guests you like. Final time check. Steady and ordinary, so clocks across the island remember their cousins. Last skin of the band in a small, polite arc. No strays, no wanderers, only the net breathing like surf in miniature. You trim the gain a whisper, not because you doubt the set but because you prefer to hand over a quiet animal that will not startle in new hands. You call the relief by call sign, not by name, and the answer arrives with the respectful energy of someone who's slept just enough to be honest. The ritual is unremarkable on purpose. Net healthy. Secondary unchanged. Traffic light. You point with a pencil, not a finger, voltmeter here, antenna lead slacken there, and your partner, who has watched 100 of these, slides aside so the new watcher can see the horizon the way it likes to be seen. You do not tell stories, you name facts. The stories can stay folded where sleep keeps them. You close the log the way you close a door without waking a child. Time, origin, destination, gist. 1 line per message, no embroidery, no opinions, no heroics. The final entry gets the same tidy hand as the first. If a clerk reads this hour in a month, he will not be able to tell when fatigue tried to borrow your pencil. You lay the pencil parallel to the page, not because it matters but because every civilized gesture in a tent is a down payment on tomorrow's order. Light joke one, you declared the pencil. Officer's country. For the night. The gecko on the ridgepole salutes with a tail twitch that could be read as, carry on. Power down is a kindness performed slowly. You do not slap a switch and walk away. First, a last, small check of frequency, centered exactly so the next ear hears confidence. Then voice to net gentle. Clear. The handset goes cradleward as if the cord were old twine that might remember a better knot if you're gentle. You wrap the lead in a figure 8, the loop the size of your forearm, so no kink will grow overnight into a sulk. The filaments dim like evening on sandstone. You let them finish the thought before you interrupt with, off. The chassis holds its warmth a minute, and you lay your palm on it the way you'd lay a calming hand on a pony that just proved steady under a new rider. Mainstream fact slips into the routine like a checklist you could do with your eyes closed. Marine units kept scheduled radio watches with strict reliefs, and many posts observed. Stand to. At dawn and dusk. Maximum readiness during the two most likely attack windows, a practice inherited from earlier wars and retained in the Pacific. You note it to the new pair. Stand to at first light, as usual. He nods. No sermon, just a hinge that will swing correctly when the sky changes color. The battery gets its own goodbye. You read its lazy needle and write the number in the little corner a few of you use like a ledger. In at 12.3, out at 11.7, so the charging crew won't have to guess which sibling is sleepy. Negative off, then positive, no sparks, no drama, a soft thank you that no one hears but you and the set. The spare, cradled in canvas, sits ready like a loaf on a shelf. You pull the straps snug, batteries roll in dreams if you let them, and chalk a tiny mark on the crate so the next hand will know where you left the center of gravity of the night. Quirky tidbit. A signalman in your company stitched a small felt square that says sleep in tidy block letters. It lives on the set's top cover, face down while the radio works, face up when the filaments cool. No manual mentions it. No one disrespects it. The geckos consider the square a ceremonial landing pad and observe its rituals better than some lieutenants do. Outside, the watcher for the new pair does the countersign two-step with the perimeter sentry, a word and its answer, rehearsed until even sleep can whisper them, then steps back and without making the tent complain. You pass him the pebble you and your partner used as the quietest non-commissioned officer in the Pacific. He smiles because he has met this sergeant before. The pebble, promoted and demoted a dozen times, retains its rank through competence. Historians still argue whether rigid adherence to SOP at handoff, every check, every countersign, every stand to, saved more lives than flexible practice tailored to island quirks, or whether the genius was in knowing when to be a metronome and when to be a jazz musician with a very small horn. You live your answer without publishing it, do the dull things exactly, and your creativity remains free for the 5 minutes a month when improvisation is the only door left unlocked. You tidy the small geography. The antenna wire gets an inch of slack so Nightwind can gossip without yanking. The handset rests with its cord not touching the ground. Rats love rubber the way officers love acronyms. The lantern turns its face toward the canvas wall, not the log, as if it might learn to read in the dark. Your canteen lid becomes the set's temporary hat to keep you from practicing infiltration. Light joke 2, you warn the lid it is now in charge. It promises to preside with dignity and poor grammar. When you finally step away, you do it as if leaving a sleeping infant. You don't look back because looking back wakes things. The island meets you at the door with the soft push of air that travels downhill at night, cooler, kinder, full of leaf gossip. You and your partner walk the 10 paces to the sleeping line without speaking, and the sand obliges by smoothing your steps behind you the way a good clerk smooths a file folder. A low voice by the cook fly says, "How's the surf?" And you answer, counting to 3, which is both weather and lullaby. Weapons are checked with the same quiet liturgy as radios. Clear chambers. Dry oil. Bolts ridden home as if metal could sleep like a person. You place your rifle where your hand will find it without groping, and your hand, obedient, finds the blanket's edge instead. The canvas above holds the smell of hot cloth cooling. Your rack remembers your shape because you taught it earlier. You lie down and your ears, traitors, keep listening for a minute, phantom static, ghost vowels from a set already off, the mind's afterimage of discipline. It fades like phosphor. Mainstream aside hums itself towards sleep. Marines. 11 general orders. Lived in mouths across theaters. To take charge of this post and all government property in view. And even if you never recited them on the net, the posture seeped into handoffs. You take charge. You are relieved. You surrender your post in good order. Old words fit new tense because tense still need the simple grace of beginning and ending without fuss. You practice the tiny courtesies of lights out. Boots turn heel out so ankles don't swear later. Mess kit nested so no mouse choir auditions at 3 in the morning. A letter folded under your shirt where it can finish speaking without the lantern. Your partner rolls to one side and delivers a joke at the exact altitude where humor becomes a sedative. If you snore, make it in Morse so I can log it. Light joke 3. You promised to send only our 4. Received. He groans, accepts his fate, and is asleep before the sentence reaches the tent wall. In the gap between duty and sleep, your hands rerun the ceremony without tools. Headset down. Log closed. Filaments dim. The mind, pleased, lets the scene go like a kite released on purpose. You count 3 waves and stop counting because numbers have clocked out. The island folds itself smaller around you. A map put away neatly so the table can be used for breakfast. Sometime near false dawn, Stanton will lift the camp like a single eyebrow. Men will step into their places without being angry about it because anger is loud and dawn prefers quiet. The new pair will be where you were, headset snug, horizon watched, small talk put on a shelf. If there is a warning, it will be spoken by someone whose voice knows how to be a bell without being a trumpet. If there is none, the hour will finish being itself and slide into morning without headlines, which is the correct way for an hour to retire. You allow yourself one last inventory, just to be rude to worry. Set good. Log clean. Battery marked. Pebble promoted elsewhere. Partner breathing like a patient tide. You let the list end before it can become an argument. The tent loosens a seam and sighs. The gecko patrol declares the moth situation resolved for now. The lagoon, which has been practicing silver in the dark, rehearses a line of pale it will perform for the sun. In that soft change, your shoulders unclasp and your jaw forgets work. Sleep arrives without knocking, and the night folds shut along the crease you made for it. Straight, neat, no torn corners. The headset, on its nail, looks like a horseshoe hung correctly in a house that believes in both physics and luck. The radio, cooling, keeps the last of its heat long enough to warm the air the size of a prayer. You borrow that warmth and fall, not like a stone but like a page, turned once, laid flat, ready for whatever story will be written when the next pencil is lifted. Morning has a habit of finding you whether you're ready or not. The new pair has the net. The gecko has eaten its moth. The pebble sergeant has accepted a lateral transfer. You walk the short path from the tent to the world and the island lays a gentle hand on your shoulder. Light, then a little more light, then enough for names. Somewhere behind you the set cools and remembers all the words it kept safe. You carry only one of them now, quiet, and you carry it like water. War ends the way a radio powers down, not all at once, but surely enough that everyone can hear the difference. Orders come folded smaller, then stop. You fold maps along the pride-worn creases and slide them into a drawer that will become a story someday. You step onto ships and trains that smell like other people's letters and go places your grandmother's map never drew. In the years that follow, you take jobs with clocks, with soil, with engines that don't mind being named after birds. You learn to sleep without a headset. Some nights you still reach for the dial in your dreams and find a cool canteen lid instead. Light joke 1. You tell your wife that if you ever snore in Navajo, she should log it. She says she'll log it in English so nosy neighbors feel included. Mainstream Fact puts down its book and speaks plainly. The Navajo Code remained classified until 1968. 2 decades of quiet in which you explained your service with the kind of sentences that mean everything and reveal nothing. In 1982, a presidential proclamation named August 14th Navajo Code Talkers Day. In 2000, Congress authorized the Congressional Gold Medal for the original 29 and silver medals for the others. In 2001, surviving code talkers received them, and medals were presented posthumously to families. Names that had traveled as call signs were said aloud under bright lights, and the old habit of brevity learned to stand still long enough for a photograph. Recognition arrives like careful mail. Speeches, handshakes, a medal held with a hand that knows weight. A general says, "Never broken." And newspapers make the phrase into a headline that feels simple in a useful way. Little kids with notebooks ask you what "ant" stood for, and you keep your promise to the old rules by answering "ant," then explaining, slowly, kindly, how a language can be both home and armor. You still don't give the whole drawer. You give enough to make the child grin and the grandmother nod. The eel in the river stays a shadow, as it should. Quirky tidbit. When the code was finally declassified and you could speak of work that had kept its own counsel for longer than some radios live, a few men discovered they had forgotten how to be loud. They'd stand at a podium, clear their throats, say, "Good morning," and the voice would come out in net cadence. Short clause, pause, short clause, pause, as if the microphone were a handset and the audience were a battery that needed coordinates. Later, at home, their grandchildren would play radio at the kitchen table, tapping spoons on saucers and announcing, "Over," after asking for more fry bread. Families adjusted. The spoons survived. Historians still argue whether language-based field ciphers such as yours ought to be called codes or transpositions, whether their true gift was speed in an era of bulky machines or the cultural assertion that an indigenous language could become a national instrument without ceasing to be itself. They argue whether success depended chiefly on structural complexity, tones, verb morphology, or on human practice, discipline, pairing, no paper, constant synonym drift. Some debate whether the legend of Unbreakable sometimes flattens the human difficulty of nights like your nights into a single proud syllable. You let them argue. The surf still counts to 3. Your pencil remembers where "shot" lives on a page. You know what the work felt like. A river moving exactly fast enough. The afterstory lives in small rooms. A school invites you to speak. You carry a map that has forgotten how to be military and draws rivers in a friendly blue. You hold up a picture of a set that looks to modern eyes like furniture with a personality. You tell them an island can teach a person to hear weather. You tell them geckos will come to meetings uninvited and vote for more vowels. You tell them a pebble kept 2 men honest. A boy in the back asks what "danger close" means, and you say, "It means the math is urgent and the voice must be calm." The teacher writes that on the board. You watch a few kids copy it as if it were about exams. You do not protest. At reunions you learn the plural of silence. Men stand with hands folded around the memory of a handset and exchange nonsense lines the way pianists exchange scales, to prove the fingers still know the tune. Old synonyms stroll the room: hummingbird, shark, iron fish, and bump elbows with medals. Someone tells the story of the corporal who knit a bead string for authentication and never dropped a bead again. Someone else brings a domino tile with the 6 up and sets it on the table like a timekeeper who chose to attend. The widow of a friend smiles at your joke and cries at your pause and thanks you for both. You carry the thanks home and put it beside the letter where your mother once said, "Don't get thin." Sometimes the legacy arrives where you least expect it. A young Marine you've never met stops you at an airport because your cap says, "Code Talker," and his grandfather taught him to notice words that carry weight. He says, "Thank you," and looks at the carpet like he's afraid of saying more. You tell him what a sergeant told you once. "Let the round be the drama, not your voice." He grins, stands taller, disappears down the concourse with a gait that suggests his boots have a job to do. You sit with a paper cup of coffee and watch people step on and off their own nets all day long. Mainstream aside, placed gently on the table. In 2014, Chester Nez, last of the original 29, died. Memorials spoke his name where earlier only call signs lived. Honors continued. Navajo Code Talkers museums, highway signs, classroom units, a flood of books whose covers glowed with late light. Each new line on a plaque felt like a little log you added to an old fire without making it brag. Late recognition is still recognition. Late warmth is still warmth. Light joke too. Once, at a parade, a reporter asked if you could say something in code for the camera. You said, "No." In English, then, "No." In Navajo, and added, "Over," because she looked like she needed a pro word to find her next sentence. She laughed, which is the sound interviews make when they realize they can relax. A few nights a year, the old tent comes back around you without needing canvas. The surf is a radiator in your apartment. The stars are the reflections in a window you forgot to darken. The gecko is a moth that can't decide which porch flight to love best. You lie there and pronounce the alphabet creatures once, just to see if they still hold their jobs. They do. You whisper the tiny Hogan your pencil used to draw in a page corner, and the room, grateful to be included, settles. Historians still argue whether the fame that finally arrived, documentaries, speeches, coins, risked turning a craft into a myth. You carry the safer answer. Myths can be kind if they let the craft keep its plain clothes. You tell the story slow. You keep the jokes small and round. You offer the debate a chair and a cup of coffee, and then you take your old place in the corner, where your voice can be heard without making itself important. Light joke 3. Your grandchildren teach your phone to ding like a field set when texts arrive. You pretend you don't like it. At dinner you say, "Say again last," when the youngest mumbles. Everyone rolls their eyes and repeats clearly. The food gets to the right mouths faster. The tradition lives. There is one more letter to send, and you send it nightly without paper, a word for well placed, addressed to the past and signed in good sleep. The radio taught you that accuracy can be gentle. The war taught you that gentleness does not need permission to be strong. The metal taught you that late light is still light. You go to the door, breathe the night air, and remember how to say, "Thank you," to weather. Then you turn off the kitchen lamp the way you used to dim the lantern, slow enough to honor what it did, fast enough to let the dark arrive on time. Let the tent be canvas again, and then let the canvas be only a soft idea folded on a shelf. The radio cools to a comfortable hush, filaments fading like far boats, and the last tidy line in the logbook closes its eyelids. Your shoulders release the careful square they held for so many hours and learn the roundness of a pillow. Breath slows, words loosen their belts and sit down in quiet chairs. Picture a simple path you know by heart. It might be the sandy run from tent to beach, or the short walk from a Hogan door to a shade tree, or just a few steps from one room to the next. Feel how the ground remembers your feet, how the air greets your face with mild temperature and no opinions. The sky above is generous with stars, but they keep their brightness folded, like good napkins waiting for morning. The ocean counts, patient, a soft metronome you don't need to match because it is keeping time on your behalf. If a thought arrives that tries to behave like urgent traffic, set it gently on a tiny table and give it a sign that reads, routine. You can answer it tomorrow. For now, everything is already acknowledged, already logged, already clear. Let the little pebble in your pocket, yes, that one, take the night watch. It is very good at stillness. Inhale through the nose, feel the coolness expand the ribs. Hold a moment, as if listening for a distant check-in. Exhale through the mouth, hear how the room is pleased by your calm. Imagine the lantern turned down and then out, no rush, no fuss, the wick remembering warmth without needing flame. In that soft dark, the alphabet creatures curl up and sleep in their drawers. The map folds itself neatly. The pencil lies parallel to the page like a thin moon on quiet water. You have sent what needed sending. You have kept what needed keeping. The net is healthy. The night can fold shut. Sleep finds you like a steady voice on a good frequency, clear, unhurried, always there when you lean your ear toward it.